estates and POAs today. We'll get a little bit of information about some entities as well in the end. So hopefully this is useful to your transactions. These things happen relatively frequently in realtors transactions. People die all the time, right? Things go south, dower's a problem, somebody's husband isn't signing. So this is meant to, hopefully shed some clarity on these issues that you are going to encounter. So what we're gonna start with are deceased title holders. My seller is dead, right? The title holder is dead. So what do I do as a realtor if I have a dead seller? You give up on the transaction, you go get a better one where the seller's not dead. Okay, I'm just kidding. All right, so so there's a way, obviously there's a path forward, there's always a path forward, but how complicated it's going to be is a different question. So always be mindful of the fact if you have a deceased seller, if you have an estate that's selling, if you're talking to anybody but the seller on the house, if it's their daughter, whoever it is, inquire, hey, is somebody dead? What's going on? Has an estate been open? So you can get a better handle on how the transaction's gonna go. So if you have a deceased seller, how do we start kind of thinking about this? So what's going to happen next is almost entirely determined by title to start with, right? So if you have something called a survivorship tenancy, I'm sure you've heard of that quite a bit, it's popular. Let's say Sam and I are in a survivorship tenancy together for a property. If one of us passes, the other one is going to inherit the title automatically as the survivorship tenant. There are exceptions to that rule that we'll get into, like divorce and things like that, but overall, the concept is if two folks are in a survivorship tenancy, if one of them passes away, the title is going to automatically transfer to the surviving tenant. So there's no probate estate, there's no court, okay, there's nothing. The survivorship tenancy controls where the title is gonna go, okay? You could also have what's called a transfer on death designation on title. So I'm sure you've heard of that as well, because that's also very popular. So that helps folks avoid probate in the same way that survivorship does. So I could be entitled to my house, and in fact, that's how I have it. I bought my house before we got married, and so I'm the only one that was entitled to my house. I did a transfer on death designation to my, then boyfriend, now husband. And so that if something were to happen to me, if I got hit by a bus, that transfer on death designation would have kicked in, and he would have inherited the title to the property. So again, there's no probate estate. No one's opening up court for me. It doesn't matter if I have a will or not. The transfer on death designation is controlling what's happening with the property. Okay. The third manner you could have that is going to avoid probate is titles held in a trust. Okay, so again, trusts are pretty common. You come across those pretty frequently now. In a trust, the trust holds title, and there's a trustee that acts for the trust. So it's somebody that carries out all the functions that they have to carry. When the trustee dies, a successor trustee steps in. Okay, so again, there's no probate estate. It doesn't matter if somebody had a will or not, title's vested in a trust. If that trustee is dead, then the next one that's designated in the trust documents is just gonna step in and take over the functions of the deceased trustee. Okay, so in all of those examples, again, the takeaway is there's no court, there's no probate proceeding, right? No one's getting a headache because it's just simple affidavits that get filed for all these things, and title gets transferred with no problem. Okay, so if you have these, you're in good shape. If you don't have them though, then we start getting into this rigmarole of analysis, all right? And it gets a little dense here, but the good news is the title company is figuring this out for you. So your job is just to, alert the title company to what's going on. And they'll see on your exam as well if somebody's deceased usually. But what's gonna happen next is gonna be determined by all sorts of factors here. So if none of those things that we talked about apply in the prior page, then the next determination is going to be if the owner died with or without a will. Okay. If a person dies with a will, we call that dying testate in Ohio, and that is quite literally defined as to have spoken testate. Okay, so when you die with a will, you're considered to have spoken for your last will and testament. If you die without a will, we call that intestate. Again, the concept is that you have died without speaking your final last will and testament. Okay? So if you die testate, if you die with a will, okay, then your assets, your property is going to be distributed according to your will, right? And the will is going to appoint an executor to act on behalf of your estate. So they're going to carry out all the functions. They got to sell the property, tie up all your loose debts and things like that in your estate. The executor is going to carry out that function. If you have a will and there's nothing else on title that's overriding you having a will with nothing else, you're buying yourself a ticket to probate court. Okay, if you have a will, a probate court has to administer it. So, folks get confused because they bring a will into the title company and say, well, the will leaves everything to me. So now I'm gonna sell the property. It doesn't work like that. You have to probate it through court, okay? So if you have a will, you're going to court. In order to sell the property from the estate, then, once you end up in probate court, if you end up in probate court, that same executor that we talked about that's carrying out the functions of the estate, they have to have power granted to them in the will that allows them to sell the property, right? So in my will, I mean, it's pretty standard now that you're going to have that included, but in some wills that are not that well done, or somebody made up a homemade will, or maybe it's an older will that doesn't contain that provision. There's not always language that permits the executor to expressly sell the real estate, and that's a problem too, right? So they have to be given that permission to dispose of real estate. If the will does not grant the executor the power of sale, we just keep going kind of down, the rabbit hole. So we still have ways to move forward, just gets more complicated. Ohio law provides that unless it's expressly prohibited by the will, so unless the will specifically says my executor cannot sell my real property, okay, then the executor can still sell the property, but they have to meet these additional elements now because they were not given that power expressly in the will. So what do they have to do? First and foremost, surviving spouse, all of the legatees and devisees in the case of testacies, all basically fancy terms for anybody that's around to survive you, okay? And all of the heirs in the case of intestacy give written consent to a power of sale for particular personal real property or to a power of sale for all real property that belongs to the estate. Each consent must be filed with the probate court. So I'm not sure if any of you have run into, we call this a consent sale. And again, what's required is the consents from all the legal heirs of the decedent to be filed with the court, okay? So that's the first element they have to meet. The second element the executor has to meet in order to sell it from the estate is the sales price has to be at least 80% of the value that's listed for the property in the inventory of the estate. So if you have a house that you've listed for, if you have, an inventory in the estate that lists the house for $100,000 value, okay? But your sales price, for whatever reason, you were only able to negotiate 60. That's a problem, okay, because you have to have at least 80% of the value of the inventory as the sales price. So if you can't meet that element, you either have to go back to the, negotiating table, which most folks are not thrilled to find out they have to pay more money, right? Something they already agreed to. But that's gonna be an element that you have to meet if this is the route that the executor has to go. And then the third element, and this is important because this comes up all the time as well. So this power of sale, this consent sale that we're talking about here, you cannot go this route if any of the legal heirs to the decedent are minor children, okay? So a lot of folks unfortunately die with minor kids. If that's the case and they died with a will, and again, the executor doesn't have the power to sell or whatever else is going on, they're not gonna be able to meet this threshold necessarily because there's minor heirs that are involved, okay? And nobody can consent for a minor heir. So there's limitations to this. And again, what happens, we just keep going further and further down, so I can't do that either. Okay, now what? This house is never gonna be sold, or, what's the deal? How do we get this moving forward? Okay, well, we can keep moving forward. We're just gonna have to get more complicated. So if the executor administrator not granted power to sell in the will, can't meet the elements that we just talked about on the prior page because there's either minor heirs or it's not 80%, value for sales or whatever it is. Then what do they have to do? Then they go to what we call a formal adversarial land proceeding or a land sale, if you've ever heard of that term. Okay, if you hear that in your transaction, go get a drink that afternoon. The land sale proceeding is lengthy, it's costly, it's a full-blown essentially lawsuit within the probate estate to get rid of the property, okay, but they have to treat it as a lawsuit essentially. So a complaint gets filed, just like a complaint is filed in a lawsuit to initiate a lawsuit, the same thing happens here. The executor files a complaint, they have to name all the appropriate parties and things like that. There's an adversarial proceeding that's open with the probate court. So again, time consuming and costly. So that's kind of the gist of what happens when you die with a will, right? So let's talk about now what happens if you die without a will. As we talked about, that's called intestate. So intestate, if you die intestate, your assets are not going to be distributed according to a will because you don't have one, right? They're distributed according to statute. Okay, so statutory code that somebody in Ohio wrote in like 1946, which we'll get to that in a moment. That's how your property is going to go. Okay, so There is a benefit, believe it or not, to sometimes dying without a will, because title companies are able to accept what we call an affidavit of real estate inherited. So the title to the property can actually be transferred to the heirs without a probate proceeding with an affidavit. Which is kind of counterintuitive because you did a bad thing by not having a will. We like to think everybody should have a will when they die, but in this case, it might actually benefit somebody. So you could do this affidavit of real estate inherited if somebody died without a will. The title company's gotta get comfortable with it, though. They have to be able to establish who the legal heirs are with certainty, because again, there's no probate estate being administered, so the title company is relying on the customer to come in and give the information about who the legal heirs are. So they might ask for like an obituary, they might ask for death certificates, things like that to verify that you aren't. You can open an intestate estate, so somebody that died without a will, you can still open an estate for them in probate court, okay? If you needed to. If an intestate probate proceeding is opened, again, the administrator, in order to sell the property from that estate, we call it an administrator instead of an executor now, because there's no will. So when you have a will, it's an executor. When you don't have a will, it's an administrator. The administrator of the estate has to meet the very same elements that we talked about when the executor doesn't have power to sell. So the administrator wants to sell it from the estate, they're gonna have to get consents from all the legal heirs that we talked about. They have to meet that 80% value for sales price for the threshold, and you can't have any minor heirs. Okay, so same elements in a different context. This is what we call in Ohio, the intestacy distribution statute, and it's kind of summarized here for where your property will go. If you die without a will, like we just talked about. So if I die without a will and I have no surviving spouse, but that should say, but I have kids, then 100% to the children of the intestate, okay, or their lineal descendants is going to be distributed equally. Per surface means equally among them. Okay. If I have a surviving spouse and one or more children of the decedent or their lineal descendants, okay? So we're then all of the decedent's children, and they're also the children of the surviving spouse. So it's what we call a biological nuclear family, mom, dad, and okay? That is going to be distributed 100% to the surviving spouse. Now, people, I feel like get confused about this or question this. So you have kids and you have a spouse. Why should everything go to the spouse? Okay, and again, it's because this code was written in like 1945. The presumption was that you leave everything to your surviving spouse because they will take care of the children. Okay, we can all laugh about that together because we all know how divorce cases and things like that go. So that's just the reasoning behind it. So everything goes to the spouse. If you have a surviving spouse and you have one child of the decedent or child's lineal descendants, but the surviving spouse is not the parent of the decedent's child. So I had a child and then I married somebody that is not that child's parent. The first $20,000 from that estate plus half of the balance of the intestate estate is going to be distributed to the surviving spouse first. And then the remainder is going to go to the child or that child's lineal descendants, again, for stirpies equally among them. Okay. If you have a surviving spouse and you have more than one child or lineal descendants, and the spouse is the parent of one, but not all of the children. So my husband and I have one child together, we had together, but he also has children, or I'd rather have children from, a prior marriage. Then the first $60,000 plus 1/3 of the balance of the intestate estate is going to go to the spouse. And again, the remainder will get divided between the children equally. If I have a surviving spouse, and more than one child or lineal descendants, and the spouse is the parent of none of the children, okay? So, Brady Bunch situation, we all come in with kids from our prior relationships, we have no kids together. First $20,000 again, plus 1/3 of the balance of the intestate estate is going to go to the spouse and the remainder to the children equally. What you notice here is, we'll see on the next page, but you kind of start dropping out further and further to look for somebody to inherit. Okay, that's the purpose of the intestacy statute. So they start with folks that they consider to be closest to you. And then if those don't exist, then they start moving further and further out because property has to go somewhere. Okay, property is always transferred. I don't know if they mentioned that in realtor school. Property, somebody's always entitled to the property, and property always has to go somewhere. It doesn't just poof in the air because no one's doing anything with it. Okay. If I have a surviving spouse and I have no children or lineal descendants, then everything goes to my spouse. Lucky him. If I have no spouse, no children or lineal descendants, then it's going to go to my parents equally, okay, or to the surviving parent if mom's passed away or dad's passed away. If I have no spouse, no children or lineal descendants of those children, and I have no parents that are alive by the time that I die, then it's going to get distributed among my brothers and sisters, okay, or their lineal descendants. So their kids, right? Equally per surface. If I have no spouse, no children or lineal descendants, no parent, no brothers or sisters, and no lineal descendants coming from those folks, all right. Then it's going to go half to my paternal grandparents equally, or to the survivor of those grandparents, and the other half to the maternal grandparents, or to the survivor of those grandparents. So again, getting further and further out, we're going right parent, siblings, now we're getting to grandparents. But I still have nobody, okay? My family's all dead, and there's a small family, you know, it's just the way things went. So I have no spouse, no children or lineal descendants of those children, no parents, no brothers or sisters or their lineal descendants, no grandparents or their lineal descendants. Then it's going to go to what we call next of kin, and that's again determined by, it's called the table of contiguity. We're not gonna get into it, but you know, if you've ever looked at genealogy things that people do, it's this big grand table that you go down and it tells you know, it's third cousin removed or whatever it is your next closest kin, okay? If you have no next of kin, so just absolutely nobody, then it's gonna go to your stepchildren, if you happen to have those, okay? So they're really desperate to get this property to somebody. And if you have no stepchildren and none of anything, okay, then it ultimately is going to what we call a sheet to the state of Ohio. So a sheet is just a fancy legal term, it means it's going to the state, okay?
You guys can just write me into your will to bypass.
Yeah.
Just don't even worry.
Exactly. So like I said, as you see, the state tries very hard to find somebody to take, you know, to inherit your property, so they're not just taking it, but ultimately, if there's nobody, then in the end, it will go to the state, okay? Okay, in both intestate and testate probate proceedings, the executor or administrator may apply also for what we call a certificate of transfer, so you've probably come across that in your transactions. So on the prior slides, we had talked about an executor or an administrator that's trying to sell the property directly from the estate, okay, to your buyer. In this instance, they can also apply for what's called the certificate of transfer, okay? And the certificate of transfer is going to issue the property or transfer the property to the legal heirs that are determined by that probate estate. You may ask, why would I do that? Okay, well, on the prior page, we talked about the 80% requirement, right? Sometimes that's kind of like the biggest factor for why they elect to go the certificate of transfer route, because they don't want to mess with the purchase price and they can't meet 80% and they know that. So they say, you know what, forget it. We're just gonna do a certificate of transfer to the legal heirs, and then your legal heirs are going to become the seller to your transaction. It's not the estate selling anymore. It's the legal heirs inheriting it through the certificate of transfer and then becoming your sellers, okay? So like we talked about, what's the biggest factor for that? It's usually that 80% factor. When there's no power to sell granted to the executor and they're kind of stuck in this, you know, hamster wheel, they say, okay, we're just gonna do a certificate of transfer and get rid of this whole additional requirement that we have to meet. What's important to realize, if you own property in Ohio, okay, but you die in another state, this happens a lot too. So, you know, folks are in Florida, okay, they were living in a retirement home, but they have a property up here. I die in Florida, okay? They open up an estate for me in Florida because I'm a Florida resident. I've been living in Florida the last 20 years. I just happen to have property in Ohio. That Florida estate has zero effect on Ohio, okay? And that's the beauty of America. We have the states, right? And states don't do what the other state necessarily does. We do what we do. So Florida is great. Florida's gonna have control over anything that's happening in Florida. Florida probate has no control over property in Ohio. So if you have somebody that dies in another state, you have to open what we call an ancillary proceeding in Ohio, in an Ohio probate court, for an Ohio probate court to administer the property. Okay? And again, it's because the other court has no jurisdiction over us. So this is just a nice summary, little chart, which again, you guys will get a copy of these slides if you want them, to put yourself to sleep at night when you're bored, but, okay, or you can impress your friends at Thanksgiving this year, they'll just whip out this chart. So this kind of summarizes for you what we talked about. So non-probate assets or non-probate administrations, you know, do I have a joint owner, like the survivorship tenancy that we talked about, right? That'll buy me a ticket out of probate. I don't have to go to probate. Do I have a transfer on death beneficiary designated on title? I don't have to go to probate. Do I have a trust that's entitled? Like we talked about, I don't have to go to probate. Whereas in this situation, right, I don't have these things going on, then we get to this, okay, and then we start determining what's going on about, did I die with a will, did I die with no will? And then we talked about all the various kind of elements and requirements that you may have. stepping from that, okay?
A question.
Yes, ma'am.
If someone has a transfer on death
Mm-hmm.
and the person passed away in January and they still haven't transferred it.
So they probably just haven't, but the affidavit of confirmation is what we call that for transfer on death. It's memorializing the death, but the title is actually transferred at the moment that person died. So they just haven't cleaned up title, so to speak, and if we were to go closing, the title company's just gonna make you record an affidavit at closing to transfer that, but the
Okay.
title legally transferred according to that
Okay,
affidavit.
so they wouldn't have to go and do it, the title company could do it.
The title company can do it, yeah.
But we would need to have, cause it's siblings,
Mm-hmm.
then their spouses need to sign.
Yes, because they will come into title
Okay.
and then they will be the sellers, so dower and all those things will kick in.
Perfect.
Yeah. Perfect, okay. All right, moving on to title that is held by a trust. Okay. First of all, what is a trust? I don't know, it's like a fancy thing that rich people get, right? Right. A trust is really not that fancy. A trust is just a written agreement, okay? It's a written agreement that encompasses what we call a fiduciary relationship in which one party that is known as the grantor or the settlor, that's the party that sets up the trust, they give another party, like I set up a trust and I give Sam the power as trustee, okay, to hold title to the
Choice.
property. Questionable, Sam. The right to hold title to the property and assets, okay, for the benefit of a third party who is the trust beneficiary. That's right. So we have three parties that are circling here. It's the person that sets up the trust, it's the person that administers the trust, and then there's a person that benefits from the trust. In Ohio, it could be, all three could be the same person. So I could set up, the Alina Duke Stansky Revocable Trust. I'm the one that set it up. I will act as trustee while I'm alive, and the trust is benefiting me while I'm alive. So I'm all three, the beneficiary, the settlor, and the trustee, okay? Again, just a nice little visual chart. I'm a visual learner, so sometimes pictures help, but same thing, right? Grantor, the individual who establishes the trust, determines what I'm gonna put into it. The trustee, individual or institution who manages the trust assets. And the beneficiary, of course, with a nice little dollar sign for us, is the one who's benefiting or getting the benefits, the money from the trust. A trust may also have a fourth party kind of in the mix. We call that a trust protector. They're essentially meant to be like a second set of eyes or an extra set of eyes that make sure the trustee, who's actually carrying out all the responsibilities for the trust, is doing what they're supposed to. They might give advice on investing and things like that. But really it's just an extra set of eyes to make sure the trustee does what they're supposed to do, okay? Trusts are established for various reasons, but some of those reasons are to provide legal protection to your assets, to save time and probate expenses, okay, that's a biggie. And to avoid or reduce inheritance for estate taxes, so that's the wealthy folks that set up trust to avoid having to pay taxes on it, right? Trusts allow for trust property to pass directly to the designated beneficiary upon the settlor's death without the need for probate administration, which can be costly and time consuming, like we just talked about. So, let's say my property my house is vested, in Alina Duke Stansky as trustee of the Alina Duke Stansky Revocable Trust. Alina gets hit by a bus tomorrow. My trust agreement says the successor trustee is Sam. Sam quite literally steps in the moment that I'm dead, okay, and she can distribute the property to whoever I left it to in the trust. So this can all happen within the span of 5 minutes. If everybody moves quickly, Sam, if you could get to my deathbed, we can get this property out, okay? So, but the point is, there's no probate estate, it's instantaneous, right? Like it's a succession of things because the agreement dictates what happens.
So you can have a mortgage on a property and it still be in a trust.
You can, but some lenders get weird about it, so if you go to like refinance and things like that, they'll make you take it out of the trust and put it in your individual name. And then people just put it back into the trust after closing. But most lenders, I think, have gotten used to this trust concept now, so they'll allow folks to take, mortgages out in trust names. They used to be really weird about it. So again, the benefit of the trust is there's no probate administration, everything's happening instantaneously. What are the requirements of a valid trust in Ohio? Do I just stand outside and I create a trust, okay, and then that's it? No, all right, so you have to meet certain elements, so the settlor of the trust has to have capacity to create the trust. So your 12-year-old child unfortunately cannot create a trust as much as they want to. They have to be 18 at least, okay, and of sound mind. So that's important too, right? If the settlor indicates his or her intent to create a trust, so again, my intent is to create a trust, and you'll see that in trust agreements, it's like one of the first sentences in there, it says, I, so-and-so settlor, it is my intention to create this revocable trust. The trust has to have a definite beneficiary, so you can't say, I leave the property in this trust to kids that my, daughter may have someday,
Mhm.
okay? Because that's undefined, right? So you have to have a definite beneficiary. The trustee has duties to perform which are specified in the trust document, so you have to empower the trustee to do things, right? So whether that's sell real property, tend to your garden, get rid of your car, whatever it is, but you give them powers in that trust document to carry out what they need to do. And then this last one, we talked about the sole trustee and the sole beneficiary are not the same person. I put an asterisk next to that because again, in Ohio, you could have the same person be all three. The caveat on that is a different person has to inherit the property when you die. Okay, and all trusts are gonna provide for that anyway. So that's the rule. Generally, you can't have it be the same person, but you actually can. Each trust can fall into these broad categories. We can categorize them as so a living or testamentary trust and a revocable or irrevocable trust, or revocable or irrevocable, whatever you prefer. What is a living trust? It's just like the name suggests. You may have heard of it referred to as inter vivos. Okay, so fancy Latin terms. It's a written document in which an individual's assets are provided as a trust for the individual's use and benefit during their lifetime. Okay, so again, I set up a trust for my benefit. I act as trustee during my lifetime. I have a living trust. It's acting for my benefit, right? So I'm the beneficiary that is pulling money and whatever else from the trust. The assets are then transferred to my beneficiaries at the time of my death. So I die and my trust says, I want the property to be distributed to Sam. The assets are gonna get distributed to Sam. Okay, so that's a living trust. A testamentary trust is also called a will trust, okay, and that, it gets a little complicated, but it's actually created by somebody's last will and testament, okay? So what they'll have is, a person dies, they have a will, but in the will, it will say, I'm leaving all of my property to the Sam and Alina Revocable Trust. Okay, the reason for that being is we call that a pour over, if you kind of visually think about it. So you have a will, you're opening a probate estate, but then you're taking that property right back out of probate because the will leaves everything to the trust. The reason for that being is the person set up a trust because they want everything to be in the trust. They don't want a probate estate open, right? For ease and time and, saving money. But let's say they screwed up, okay? Or life happened. So they buy a new property, they don't title it in the trust. And they haven't gotten around to transferring it into the trust, okay? And they get hit by a bus that afternoon. That title to the property is not vested in the trust, right? So it's potentially going into probate because it's gonna go into the decedent's estate, okay? But they don't wanna go to probate. That's the whole reason they had set up the trust, right? Well, guess what? Here comes the catch-all because my will in probate just says everything right back to the trust. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, pouring right back over from the estate to get it into the trust because you want to be functioning in the trust, not in the estate. So that's called a testamentary trust, when you create this pour over provision in your will that says take everything out of probate and just transfer it back to the trust. A revocable trust or revocable, just like the name suggests, I can revoke it, right? So I can change it or I can terminate it anytime during my lifetime. An irrevocable or irrevocable trust, as the name implies, is the opposite. I cannot change it. Once it's established, the provisions in there are pretty much permanent. They're set in stone, okay? And that can be a benefit, it can be a hindrance. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Living trusts, like we talked about, they can be revocable or irrevocable. Testamentary trusts are only irrevocable because they're created when the person's already dead. Okay, so you can't change things after someone's died, and that's why all the testamentary trusts, the pour over trust we just talked about, are irrevocable. Again, just a nice little visual here to summarize the difference here. Revocable trust, people, I don't know why it says this, but plan for mental disability, avoid probate, things like that. Trust maker reserves the right to dissolve and change the trust anytime while they're alive. Okay, irrevocable. You move the assets into this trust that you create, that's it, you're done. You have no control over it, you can't pull it back out, okay? Trust maker cannot take the property back. This irrevocable trust formation is very popular for Medicaid. Okay, and the reason again for that being is Medicaid thinks of, let's think about this logically. If you had a revocable trust, one that you can revoke and change during your lifetime, and you wanted that to avoid Medicaid, you would just transfer the property into your trust this week, right? Get past Medicaid and then take it out next week. Because I have the right to do whatever I want with my revocable trust while I'm alive, right? Medicaid's not stupid and they understand how the law works, so that doesn't, a revocable trust does nothing for Medicaid. Okay, you're not gonna protect from Medicaid that way. So people set up this irrevocable trust. They move all their assets out of their control into this irrevocable trust. And Medicaid views it as, okay, you can't pull it back out, right? So that protects against Medicaid. It's this creditor kind of logic of you can't be avoiding my debt.
Is there still that time frame? Like Medicaid can go back the
5 years.
Or 5
It's
years?
5 years.
So even if they do it today and they die a year later, Medicaid can still do it, even like get your assets, even if you're in irrevocable?
If you transferred it into an irrevocable trust in the last 5 years, Medicaid's still going to question that transfer because it's in the 5 year look back period.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay. This is the page talking about what we just talked about. So an irrevocable trust usually provides the most protection and the logic is it's unalterable. I can't change it. I can't play these funny games with creditors. I can't take property in and out, right, as I see fit to avoid having to pay creditors. And that's the reason that it gets all this legal protection because you're completely, divesting yourself of control of that property, okay? The other important thing that is somewhat attractive to people that can set up trusts is dower does not attach to a trust. Okay, so by a show of hands, how many people have had a transaction blow up over dower in here?
Say that again.
Okay, how many people have had a transaction blow up over dower? Somebody wouldn't release dower. Okay, all right, so if you have a buyer that, if you represent a buyer and their lender's okay with it, if there's a lender, and they're, concerned about dower for some reason, they could buy the property in the trust, okay? And the spouse is not gonna have to sign off on anything because dower does not attach to a trust. So this is sometimes, an attractive option. For whatever reason, I mean, we hear all sorts of things in real estate, right? So we'll get customers that are like, oh yeah, I'm not married. And then, we find like a marriage license or something in the exam. We're like, well, who's this person? They're like, oh, I haven't seen him in like 30 years. Okay, but you're still married, like they never got divorced, so that's great that you guys just went your separate ways, but there's still this dower interest hanging out there. So it's just a shock to people, they're like, oh, I haven't talked to him in 20 years. Okay, well, we're gonna have a problem, The one lady was like, he moved back to his home country. I don't know. Like, well, you're not closing this anytime soon, so. Okay, when the property is going to be transferred into the trust, you have to do it correctly, all right? And this gets screwed up quite often as well. So the property has to be titled in the name of the trustee and not in the name of the trust, all right? So by way of example, let's say, this is the correct way to do it. So John Smith, okay, he sets up a trust. So John Smith takes title as John Smith trustee of the John Smith Revocable Living Trust dated January 10th, 2005. Okay, so we've named the trustee and we have identified the trust, right? The trustee is John Smith, and then we have the John Smith Revocable Living Trust.
Is that how they're signing the entire
Yes.
like listing?
Correct,
agreement?
yes,
Okay.
yes, that's a
Okay.
great question,
Okay.
thank you. That's a great question. I see these purchase agreements that are incorrectly executed all the time and it drives me insane because you don't have a legal contract, okay? It's scary. People kind of bypass this all the time, it's like, whatever, okay, well, it's not whatever, because if it goes to court, the other side's gonna say, you don't even have a legal contract. Because nobody had the authority to sign this in the way that you prepared it, okay? So yes, that entire thing has to go on your purchase agreement. Now, you may not have the date of the trust or something like that, okay? But you should have the trustee and you should have the name of the trust identified. If you don't know, reach out to the title company, okay? They can pull vesting for you if you're unsure, and tell you how, title's vested, okay? So this is the right way to do it. Trustee is identified, the trust is identified. But you could screw it up, right? Like I just talked about. If you transfer to a trust in a deed which does not name the trustee, okay? So it just says John Smith Revocable Living Trust. There's no trustee identified. That deed is defective, okay? Which is scary because it can create a lot of problems. So in order to cure this problem, you can still fix it, but of course, there's limitations on everything. So let's say you have this problem, oops, we have no trustee name, the title's just vested in a trust. Okay, the title company's gonna tell you, we can file what's called a memorandum of trust, okay, to cure this problem, to fix this problem. A memorandum of trust, you've probably come across maybe, in closing documents, you've seen it, or you have a trust, whatever it may be, but it's basically just a summary of what the trust, calls for, the provisions of the trust, the powers that are granted to the trustee, kind of the relevant meat and potatoes that gets pulled out, of the trust, okay? And then in that same, memorandum of trust, you would recite the fact, hey, Sam had transferred property into, the Sam and Alina Revocable Trust on such and such date, but she had failed to name a trustee. Okay, this memorandum is being filed to basically cure that legal defect. Okay, if you do that, then that fixes the defective deed. Okay, and title's good again. All right, so simple fix. But there's limitations on it, all right? So the curative section is retroactive, however, it will not have retroactive effect if another conveyance has been recorded prior to the recording of the memorandum of trust. Okay, so when people start dying, this is when we have a problem. So, for example, we have John Smith, we love John Smith, okay, he's the example guy for it. So John Smith conveys title to his real property, okay? He has some idiot attorney prepare a deed that just says the John Smith Trust, all right, as the grantee, so the attorney screwed up. So they prepare this deed, they transfer it to the John Smith Trust, they don't name a trustee, right? And the beneficiaries of that trust that John had set up are his children from his first marriage, okay? He loves them so much, he wants them to be taken care of when he dies. And so he specifically provided in his trust that all of the trust property that I'm putting into this trust goes to my kids from my first marriage, okay? John Smith then dies. John Smith dies with a will, okay? The will says something different because he got remarried. The will says everything is going to my second wife. Okay, so completely different distributions of property. The trust calls for everything to go to the kids, the will calls for everything to go to the wife, okay? The intent, obviously, for John was to have the real property passed to his kids. That's why he bothered setting up the trust, right? And doing the deed into the trust. He just didn't know that it was gonna be screwed up and defective, okay? But the intent clearly was for his kids from this first marriage to get the house, right? Okay, unfortunately, when the defective deed is discovered, the real property is included in his probate estate, right? Because he died with a will. Okay, so they open up a probate estate and they include the real property in it because that deed is defective, so they're just disregarding it. That estate then issues a certificate of transfer to transfer the property to his second wife, according to the will, right? Now, here comes John's successor trustee, whoever the successor trustee is in his trust. And says, wait, hold on a minute. I'm gonna file this memorandum of trust, okay? To cure this defective deed, because we had screwed up the deed going into the trust, but it's clear John wanted to put it into the trust, so I'll just file this memorandum, we'll pretend like it never happened, right? Because that's a way to fix this, okay? It's not going to work. And that's because there's already been an intervening transfer that's happened here. There's been a certificate of transfer that's been issued out of his estate to his second wife. So those kids from his first marriage get absolutely nothing, and it's strictly because they didn't do the deed correctly. Okay? You don't want that to happen, obviously. Trust in general could be amended or restated. Okay, a trust amendment, just like the term suggests, it revises the terms or amends the terms of a trust, generally used for certain provisions. That that are minor, that have to be modified, but the rest of the trust is basically remaining, unchanged. The meat and potatoes remain unchanged. So minor changes like updating a beneficiary's name, changes due to marriage or divorce, maybe adding a simple gift. Like the boss in my kitchen goes to Sam. I'm gonna take that out next week because I changed my mind. So a trust amendment will do that, okay? Or naming a different trustee.
And that could even be an
Irrevocable, not an irrevocable, because I can't change it, right? Irrevocable trust, you can't change it,
okay,
so
so
no.
this is just the.
So amendments for trust that will allow amendment, good point, yes. A trust restatement, okay, is a little more kind of heavy duty than an amendment, so. You're changing a whole lot of things about the trust, okay, I'm changing the way the property is getting divvied up, I'm changing all the beneficiaries, I'm basically regutting the whole thing and remodeling. Then you might as well do what we call a trust restatement, okay, so it preserves the creation of that original trust. But it basically restates the new terms of that trust, and that's because there's so many changes. You'd be walking around with a binder with 46 amendments attached to it. Okay, it just becomes cumbersome and people lose documents and it just becomes a nightmare. So just change, do the restatement of the trust and then just change all the provisions you need to go. Trust restatement, why would you need to do that? Again, if it's 46 amendments you gotta carry around. It's gonna provide clarity, avoid confusion, if you've already amended it numerous times. Power of attorney. Power of attorney. What is a power of attorney? A power of attorney is a legal document, right? That allows somebody else to act on your behalf. That's all it is. So I'm giving somebody power to act on my behalf. Who needs a POA? All right. Travelers, I'm going out of town. I love people that go to Jamaica the week of their closing. It always tickles me pink. I'm leaving on my cruise and I can't sign the documents. Okay, like maybe we should have scheduled a cruise during the week of closing, but I digress. Who am I? I'm just a, just a stupid attorney. But okay, so travelers, they might need a POA because they decided to leave town. All right, parents, I'm not sure if this is the case anymore, but it used to be if one parent was taking a child out of the country or traveling in the airport or whatever, they would ask for a POA from the other parent to take the kid. I'm not sure if they do that anymore. Or of course, somebody that's sick, so aging or ill adults in the hospital. This was huge during COVID. People could not obviously, access things. We had notaries standing outside of windows, notarizing things at nursing homes and things like that. So POAs were huge during COVID. The folks that already had a POA in place, it was nice and smooth sailing for them.
What about those last minute POAs? Like, has anybody ever had to sign as a realtor?
We'll get to that in a second. You shouldn't
Okay.
do that.
Yeah.
Don't ever do that, okay? Don't do that.
Don't like to do that.
Don't do that.
You're
Unless you're a betting woman and you just kind of want to see, where the wind blows, yeah, I wouldn't do that. So a POA may be used for a sale involving an incompetent owner, provided that that POA states it's durable, okay? So just because you have a POA doesn't mean that it's the, be all end all. The POA has to have the proper things in it too, right? So the first thing we're gonna look for is it's gotta be durable. What it has to say is, even if I am determined to be incompetent, okay, this POA power is going to continue regardless of whether or not I'm incompetent. If the POA doesn't say that, the title company is not gonna accept it, okay? And that's because the title company has no way and doesn't want to be in the position of having to determine competence for you, okay? So maybe I'm competent today, but then I became incompetent an hour before closing, right? Title company has no way of knowing that. The notary might, do their best, but. So yeah, so the point is that it's gotta be durable. It states that it survives your incompetency. It doesn't matter if you become incompetent, the POA continues. This is also really important to note because I feel like this comes up quite a bit. A POA cannot be used once the owner dies. Okay? Don't find this out the hard way. If again, inquire if your seller is deceased or if somebody is attempting, if you have anybody acting in your transaction other than the person showing on title, that to you guys, right, should trigger some analysis. Okay, why is this person the one that's signing everything? Is somebody dead? Are you the POA? Do you have the POA document, right? So this happens all the time because people don't know. They're like, I'm a POA for mom. Da, 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 da. Okay, and then they get to closing and somehow the title company finds out that no, mom's dead. Mom's been dead for 2 years. You're not POA, you're POA hot air. That's not gonna do anything for us, okay? So. Again, just kind of like a teaching moment because we've been burned. We see so much of this on the title side of things. You want to trust but verify, right? So there's nothing inherently wrong with using a POA because people might need to have a POA used for closing, right? They're out of town or they're sick, whatever it may be. But it should trigger kind of, like I said, an analysis or kind of heightened state of awareness in you because you're dealing with somebody that's purporting to have, legal powers that they may or may not have. So verify why the POA is being used. Why can't we get the seller to the closing table, right? Are they dead? Are they competent? Okay, what's going, oh, Dan has no idea what day it is. Okay, all right, so let's take a look at the POA and make sure that it says what it needs to say in order for you to be able to act as POA. Verify that POA has not expired by its terms or that it grants the powers that are necessary for the transaction. You're not expected to do this because you're not attorneys, but you can send a POA to the title company and say, hey, is this okay to use for closing? Okay, we get those inquiries all the time. We're happy to look at it for you. We'll get POAs that say, I grant Sam the power to sell my 1998 Toyota Corolla. And they're coming to closing. Okay. Well, that's great, but that's not gonna do anything. We're not gonna let you use it at closing, right? It doesn't grant the power that it needs to. Or we'll have military POAs prepared. It just baffles my mind because they prepare these on military basis, right? Legal counsel sitting on basis to prepare these for people, and then we'll get it back and it's like, this expires whatever date, and they're attempting to use it 3 days after, or whatever it is. So just because a POA document exists, it's not the end of the analysis, okay? You have to read the document, you have to know what the document says, and you have to make sure that it's legally allowing that agent to act in a way that they're acting. Couple other things to worry about with POAs, self-dealing. Okay, so just like the term suggests, be wary of self-dealing unless the POA expressly allows it. So, for example, let's say that I grant powers to Sam as my agent. I grant power of attorney to Sam over me, okay? Sam then uses her power as agent to transfer my house into her name. Okay, so she's both the agent and the party that's technically benefiting from this transfer, right? Because she's using her powers as my POA to transfer property to herself. She's self-dealing, okay? The POA has to expressly allow for that, otherwise that's not allowed. That kind of defeats the purpose of being neutral, right, and unbiased. Somebody could just act as your agent and just benefit themselves by using this power that's granted over you. So the law kind of provides for that. They say you have to have a specific provision in the POA that says my agent can self-deal, they can take my property and transfer it to themselves, even though they're my agent. Okay, that has to be allowed. Delegation of authority. Can an attorney in fact delegate his or her authority under a POA to a third party to act as attorney in fact? So sometimes you'll have somebody that calls in and says, yeah, I'm power of attorney for mom, but I'm actually gonna be in Jamaica. So I'm gonna delegate my power of attorney powers to my brother, okay, because he's in town. The power of attorney document has typically allowed for that. You don't get to just do that nilly-willy, okay? So you are designated as the agent, it's your powers. You don't get to grant them to someone else then, okay, unless the power of attorney document specifically allows you to do that. Recording, this is also, I put this in red because we get burned on this all the time. The original POA is required for closing. There's no ifs or buts or anything else about it, okay? The county's not going to accept a copy and the title company's not gonna accept a copy. Even if the title company would accept a copy, the county won't. So you have to have the original POA. We've gotten burned on this because the title company will start working on a transaction. Somebody says, I'm POA, I have the POA, they scan in a copy, they send it to the title company. Title company didn't expressly say, hey, you have the original, right? Even though, I mean, they do, but you know, for whatever reason, that was missed in the conversation, whatever it is. They get all the way to closing, this person showed up to closing, or they mail in the documents because they're in another state, and lo and behold, we don't have the original POA, it's a copy. Okay, so that whole thing just blew up when it's not closing. Yes,
If we have someone that says they're, whether it's an LLC or a POA or some sort of entity
Yeah.
that they're looking to conduct real estate in. And I might be looking half to Sam, half to you. We're more experienced in reading purchase agreements and listing agreements and addendums in real estate space than we are with those legal documents. Would you recommend, hey, let me kick this over to American,
Yeah.
kick this over just to get eyes on it?
Absolutely,
It's
yeah.
like, this is
yes.
like it's doing it, but
Yes.
I don't want to get.
Absolutely, yeah, and Sam, we're happy to do that, right? If somebody has questions about, I mean, I get inquiries all the time about, hey, this listing agent wants to make sure this POA is okay.
Yeah, we get them all the time and
Yeah.
we'll send them to Marty and then.
Right.
Marty's our underwriting manager.
Right,
And then if he doesn't know or wants to question, it normally goes to an attorney or it goes to one of our underwriters to make that decision.
yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
How do you know if it's original or not? Or that's what you're determining?
So it needs to be the wet ink, basically, so the, blue ink, I guess, is the telltale sign, how do we determine what anything signed originally, yeah, it kind of, it's wet ink, by old standards, but the county used to do this. I don't know what they do now, to be honest with you, because, again, they probably still just rub it and see if it smudges.
Interesting, wow.
I mean, there's no other way, right? It's not like there's, some kind of, document security that's built into the deed or something like that. I mean, death certificates and things, right, have that security kind of hologram thing going on, so they can tell what the original is for that. But yeah, other documents, they just smudge really most of the time. So could you get away with things sometimes if somebody's that, had enough coffee at the county that day, they might not catch that it's a copy. But yeah, make sure you have the original POA. If you don't have the original, you're gonna have a problem. Most lenders and title underwriters are going to ask you for a specific power of attorney that basically has the subject real property mentioned in it. Take this with a grain of salt, because I feel like underwriters should relax with that, because most people are not gonna attach legal descriptions of their house to their POA document, because they just live in separate legal worlds. So they've relaxed their stance on this, but at one point, the underwriters were big sticklers about the fact that you needed to have the legal description of the property attached to POA. So. Okay, just to close us out the last 9 minutes or so, 10 minutes or so, we're gonna talk about business entities, just as a bonus topic. So business entities, okay, so we're talking about things like. Whoop, went the wrong way. LLCs, corporations, partnerships, a business entity, okay? In an LLC, it's usually gonna be managed by the member or the manager. The new Ohio LLC law that they passed about 2 years ago, it's changed this somewhat, but for the most part, you're gonna have a member or a manager that's acting on behalf of the LLC. A limited liability company should have an operating agreement, okay? You're gonna run into pushback on this too, though, because it's not legally required for a sole member LLC in Ohio. So a lot of the LLCs that we deal with at closing are sole member, it's the only member. They are not legally required to have an operating agreement, okay? But that doesn't mean that they don't have to produce documents for the title company. So just because they're legally not required to have it, the title company has a higher threshold they have to meet for closing, okay? In a corporation, you're going to have not members, you're going to have a board of directors, okay, that is, appointed or elected by the shareholders of that corporation. Or you might have officers, you might have a president, a vice president, things like that are acting on behalf of the corp, okay? A corporation doesn't have an operating agreement, they have the equivalent of what an operating agreement basically contains, but it's called corporate bylaws, okay? So just different terminology, different corporate structure formation. Then we have general partnerships. These are not so popular anymore, so I don't know how much you'll run into it, if any, maybe like an old property that's vested, that's been in a general partnership for years, but these are not highly popular anymore because they expose the partners to a lot of liability. So under both the old and new partnership laws for general partnerships, the partner acting in the ordinary course of business has authority to bind that partnership. And you can file essentially a statement with the Secretary of State that authorizes somebody else to act on your behalf as the partner, okay? Again, not very popular, not gonna run into it too much. A limited partnership, you might see a little bit more of this, okay? So in a limited partnership, you have one general partner and at least one limited partner. In a limited partnership, only the general partner usually has authority to act, okay? So if you get a title that's vested in a limited partnership and all your documents are being signed by the limited partner, okay, stops, because it's only the general partner that is supposed to be acting on behalf of the partnership. Okay, so the limited partner has no managerial control over the affairs of the business. So what's the title company looking at? Okay, again, I feel like we get a lot of pushback for whatever reason on this at the title end, because people are like, why should I have to give you documents? I'm the owner of my company. Okay, because there's a lot of fraud, first of all. There's a lot of fraud and the title company has to do their job, all right? If we just took everybody at their word, then it would just be, havoc for everybody. So, the title company's gonna be checked first and foremost. Was that entity properly formed with the state? Okay, you have to be registered in a state as an entity and be in good standing. So maybe you have a company and it was registered, in Ohio, but it's been, canceled by the state 14 years ago. That's gonna be a problem for your title, right? Or at least an inquiry and further into title. You don't get to just show up and say, well, I have a company, but just hasn't been in business. So is it active? Is it in good standing? Okay, if you have operating agreement and bylaws, which title company is going to request, and again, this is the thing that gets everybody in a tippy for whatever reason, we ask for an operating agreement, they're like, why should I have to give you anything? Because the title company has to do their job. So if those exist, are the dates consistent in the registration, in that document? Who's authorized to act on behalf of that entity, okay? And are there any limitations on that authority? So you might get an operating agreement for a company that says, Sam can act on my behalf except for transactions exceeding $5. Okay? So that's a limitation, right? Sam has the power to act, but there's a limitation on her. It has to be transactions, less than $5. So Sam can't actually act at my closing table if my house is selling for $20,000, right? So again, just because the legal document exists doesn't mean that it's the end all be all. You have to review the document. You have to make sure the document says what it needs to say, okay? Are there other closing documents that maybe businesses executed? So sometimes, membership benefits are sold or transferred around. They didn't provide those documents. They're not in the public record anywhere and they forgot to give them to the title company. Okay, so we get an operating agreement that says Alina is the sole member, but everything's being signed by Sam as member. So the title company comes back and says, well, hold on a second, how did it go from Alina to Sam? And the person says, oh, oops, sorry, you know, Alina had sold her membership interest to Sam, I forgot to give you that document, so. Okay. So the title company's reviewing all this. So if they ask you for info about your client that has this business entity, don't get upset, okay, and try to control your client and tell them not to get upset. Because we're all just doing our jobs. I know, it's easier said than done. We try to kind of, you know, coddle them and say it's for your protection, you know, would you want somebody to come into a company and just, you know, just sell property right from underneath you because they didn't even bother questioning if you're, you know, Walt Disney of Disney Corporation. right? So, I mean, it's offensive, right? I mean, it's just, I would want somebody to come in and, you know, act on my company's behalf, right? I would want the title company to question who they're dealing with and if they have the authority to deal with them. Entities can also provide what we call resolutions authorizing certain persons to act, okay, so this happens quite a bit, so I'm the sole member of my LLC, but I am again going on that dreaded Jamaica cruise during closing, okay? So I'm going to appoint or authorize a different signer on behalf of my company by virtue of this resolution that says, hey, I'm the sole member of this company, I am authorizing Sam to act on my behalf as the sole member of this company, bada bing, bada boom, okay? And that's a resolution. If you don't have governing documents, which a lot of these folks, they either lost them, they don't have them, whatever it is. The title company may ask for other things like tax return schedules, okay, or indemnity affidavits to be signed, but again, this is all getting at the fact the title company is trying to verify who they're dealing with, that that person has the authority to act on behalf of that company, and to sign everything at closing, okay. Due diligence has to be taken to avoid fraud. I think I've harped on this enough now, but you know, in a common scenario, the fraudsters create a fake operating agreement, okay? And resolutions that identify themselves as the members with authority to sell or refinance the property. There's nothing stopping anybody from doing that, right? So again, the title company has to assess all this, verify what's in the public record, what's in your governing documents, you know, they're analyzing all this. Or really what happens more frequently is kind of what I call a member dispute. So let's say an LLC has 3 members, it's a multi-member LLC, okay? 2 of the members want to sell the property, but the third one doesn't. All right, so they have an internal kind of headache going on. The 2 are like, you know what, forget this dude, we gotta get this property out of the LLC name, okay? They show up to closing and they say, we have the authority to act, okay? There's two of the members here, you're good, you don't need the third one, and the title company doesn't question anything, doesn't review the operating agreement, right, doesn't put the puzzle together and says, okay. They close, you're gonna get a call 2 days after closing from the third member, and this has happened, I can't even tell you how many times. Hey, what's going on with 123 Johnson Street? I'm the third member of 123 Johnson Street LLC, and the property sold last week. I wasn't contacted for closing. I didn't authorize this to be sold at closing. Okay, so you don't want your buyer to be found in that position. That's it for today.
Nice, 11 o'clock on the nose. Oh, my.
1 minute for breaths and questions, but, okay, so I know that's a lot of information, again, Sam is happy to distribute slides to anybody that's sickly interested in them.
I'll
I'm
send it
gonna-
to everybody that's
Yeah.
logged in.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, so. If somebody has a horror tale from their closing, that they want to share, I'm always a fan.
I have a couple.
Yes, ma'am.
I wrote them down.
Okay, sounds good.
First of all, can someone name you as a trustee of their trust without you knowing?
In theory, yes. Is that gonna work out well? Probably not, but yes, you
So
could.
we can't determine which sister's getting the most when my dad dies.
Thank you.
I will know, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, so if you're a beneficiary of a trust, in theory, you are, if you're the beneficiary of the trust, you are entitled to kind of an itemization of the trust, but yeah, but could you name somebody as a trustee of a trust without them knowing? Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have one more.
Sure.
I have a lot more, but
That's
we'll go over this.
No, you're fine.
Would you suggest just doing everything in a TOD or actually setting up a trust?
It depends on that person's estate planning. It's not a one size fits all.
I see.
Yeah, so they should talk to an estate planning attorney. If it's somebody that is, you know. A trust, I would say, you know, I have customers contact me all the time about setting up a trust initially because they heard it on TV or whatever it is, they just heard the word trust. And then you get into talking to them and it's like they own one house and like one car and they have 2 adult children. there's very little reason to set up a trust because transfer on death does exist, so you can avoid probate all sorts of other ways. So trusts are usually, you know, for somebody that has a lot of property, is really wealthy. Big factor is minor children. Okay, if you have minor children, that's usually an indicator more towards setting up a trust. Because it's gonna make sense for their estate plan. But yeah, it's entirely determined by what the estate plan for that person calls for, and that's unique to everybody, right? Well, how do they want their property to go and where they want it to go when they die? Okay. Anybody else?
So instead of a trust, if you just have, you know, your one home, your vehicle, you know, your.
Yeah.
Items.
Yes. Yes.
So doing a will
Mm-hmm.
and then having a transfer on death for the
Mhm.
house is
Mhm.
probably makes more sense.
Possibly, and you may not even need a will, because again, so a car, you can go to the DMV and do a transfer on death on a car.
Oh, you can.
Yes,
Oh,
okay, you could do a transfer on death on your house, you could do a transfer on death on your bank accounts.
I just did that and it was an absolute nightmare. We had in 4 different offices, it took like 6 hours.
Oh, no.
DMV. then-
No, you're not well versed in it, cause it's a pretty simple, they just whip out one affidavit for you to sign usually at the DMV, but yeah, so. Mostly everything can be designated as pay on death or transfer on death, and so that's why I'm saying sometimes it doesn't even make sense to somebody to have a will, because remember, you have a will, you're buying a ticket to probate court potentially. Right, because the will, you have a will, so,
Yeah.
yes, ma'am.
I have a question about dower.
Yep.
And wills and trusts, so
Okay.
like with trust, dower doesn't apply.
Right.
Can somebody put in their will that I don't want my inheritance to go to my daughter's husband because he's a piece of crap? Like, or
Yes,
like,
you could, like, yeah, yes,
okay.
yeah, so I mean, here's the thing, so somebody is either designated as inheriting from you or not, so in your will, potentially, I guess you would say everything's being left to my daughter, okay? The daughter then inherits, and then it's up to that daughter's will or whatever she may have, so that her, because it becomes her property, right? So if you're worried about her husband, then it's the daughter at that point that has to protect her assets more than you protecting it the will.
But if the will doesn't specify, it's gonna go to both?
No, because he's not my legal heir, right? He's just married to my daughter. That doesn't make him my legal heir, yes.
Okay.
Nope, he's
But
her
with
legal
real
heir.
estate,
What's that?
but with real estate, if the daughter's gonna sell
Mhm.
the dad's real estate, then the husband still has to sign.
For dower, yes.
Okay.
If you're married in Ohio, it doesn't matter if you're selling or buying, whatever, and you know, people say, well, I wasn't, you know, married when I bought the house. It doesn't matter, okay? When you go to sell the property, if you're married at that time, that person has to sign for dower.
Even if the will says it doesn't go.
Yes, the will, you can't divest somebody of dower. You can't take away somebody's dower.
Okay,
It has
that
to-
was my
yep,
question.
You
Okay.
cannot, yep. you
Except
can't
for in a
circumvent-
trust.
Yep, yep.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So in a trust, you're not even getting rid of it, you're just bypassing dower altogether because you're putting it in a trust, right? So the spouse never kicks in. But
Okay.
yeah, the spouse is involved with the dower interest, there's no way to divest it of that. We have this issue come up, I feel like, a lot with people from California, okay, because in California, they don't, there's only 3 states in America that have dower. Okay, we're one of the lucky ones, so it's us, Kentucky, and I think like Alabama,
Arkansas, maybe?
Arkansas, yeah, okay. So, you know, just do your little thinking there, okay, so we're just, you know, holding the fort over here, the 3 states. With dower, everybody else has figured out how to work without this dower, but we're holding on to it like it's like the last great thing. So, people from California will provide things for closing all the time that are like, well, this is our marital agreement, right? Because we split property, however they split in California, whether it's a common property state or whatever it is, whether. So they'll provide documents that basically say, my husband has no right to anything, so he's not signing anything close. It doesn't matter, we're in Ohio, we have dower in Ohio, and your real estate's in Ohio, so your husband has to sign. They lose their minds over this because it's not consistent with California.
This is Todd Hawk. I have a bio, I'm not gonna read it though, because he said I don't need to. But this guy knows everything. He's a Jackson Township trustee, he's been chairman of the Hall of Fame stuff. He has done financial things in the past, all the stuff that we were learning about, hearing about, he used to do and is smart and doesn't do it anymore. But he, along with Rich Cosgrove and some other people, worked on a housing study in Stark County. I find it absolutely fascinating. If you've heard the term infill housing lately, you're gonna hear it again today.
Yep.
Todd Hawk.
Don't need to do that. That bio that Joe Ray put together, I have no idea where he got all that stuff. Stop.
Good one.
Stop reading, stop reading. That's exactly right. Maybe we should have Chad do this one while we're there. So I've only done this presentation about 35 times, I think, in the last 2 months. But, so we'll give you a little bit of background on this. So as Linda said, I came from the financial services world. I worked in financial services for about 25 years in a firm. In 2023, I sold my interest in that partnership. And I went to work as a consultant with Stark Economic Development Board and Strengthening Stark. And the project they wanted me to work on was the housing study. Fast forward to that year, then January of this year, I became a full-time employee of Stark Economic Development Board and Strengthening Stark to try to work the plan from the study. One of the things that happened was in June of 24, as you'll see on that slide there, the soft version, I'll call it, of the study was released at an SEDP meeting. Wasn't done, didn't finish all the things, but it started a whole bunch of conversation. But one of the things that I said in that meeting was, we're not gonna take this study, stick it on the shelf in a binder like everybody does with stuff. At the end of the day, we're gonna do something with it. We're gonna create a plan and we're gonna actually get some action out of it. There's a quote I found that said, a study without action is just another speech. I don't like giving speeches. I don't really like doing that without having some action and things that we can call out for people to do. So fast forward, we got through that. They delivered the final study in September of 2024. From September to December, we worked on how we were going to implement it and what we were going to do. In December, we created the advisory team, which Rich is part of. That group then began the process of how we go forward from there. We took, the study had 9 main recommendations in it. There are about 32 bullet points when you get through all the little arrows and stuff they put in the study. And we took that and created 5 priorities. The 5 priorities became now 5 working groups that are working to move everything forward. And we created a 6th one yesterday morning that I'll let you in on and get to the end of this. But so this was the presentation. What we came down to, one of the biggest recommendations that came out was educating people that I sit in my other hat, and elected officials on what the problems are and what needs to happen. This presentation is what we are giving to every elected official as much as we can in the county. We've been through 10 places so far: Canton, Massillon, Louisville, North Canton, Osnaburg Township, Nimishillen Township, Blaine Township, Perry Township, Village of Hartville. That one. There's a 10th one in there.
Jackson, you said Jackson?
Didn't do Jackson.
Okay.
I can give them that one. Alliance, yes, because Alliance City has a lot of, they're ahead of the game. Honestly, when we get down to those states, done some good work out there. So we're really excited to work with them as they move forward. So when we started this presentation, the big thing that we started with is, why did we do this study? If you're not familiar with Strengthening Stark, it was created about 10 years ago. There were 17 folks that came together as civic leaders. I happen to be one of those 17. We created a white paper around the fact that we were getting older, smaller, and poorer in Stark County. Not exactly the slogan you want to tell. Or you guys don't want to tell that. So how do we flip that? So that started this process of working through it. Strengthening Stark was never a 501c3. It was never a true organization. It was just a movement. The Stark Economic Development Board became the fiscal agent for Strengthening Stark. So any funds that came through went through there. All the folks that worked at Strengthening Stark were technically employed by Stark Economic Development Board, where the paychecks came from, but it really didn't exist. About 6 months or so ago, we decided that we would make them more cohesive into one together. And then right before that, we found the setup in the middle there, that diagram from Dr. Ned Hill from Ohio State University on economic development. What you see in economic development, the typical center red circle, that's what everybody thinks of as economic development. Trade and sector jobs, bringing businesses to town. How many jobs are you creating? What kind of CapEx is going out? What are you doing along that space? But all this other stuff feeds into that. And you can't do the red without all the other pieces. So commercial and industrial real estate, some of you work with that. Workforce development itself, community development, and housing. Housing has become a big deal. When we got into this, and you'll see some of this as we go, what was happening is Stark Economic Development Boards gets RFIs, requests for information, from businesses and site selectors looking to move businesses to areas. They want to know things about land size, uses. The typical questions that that first RFI are, what are the utilities? What do you have rail wise? What do you have air? What kind of interstates are close? How do we get in and out? Those have shifted to what are the utilities and what's your housing plan? How are you gonna take care of my workforce and how are you gonna develop it and what's your workforce look like today? So that shifted what SEDB needed to do, work through this. So that's why the study came about. The group that did the study, Next Move Group, they were here in February of 2024. We spent days with focus groups, talking to everybody from businesses, elected officials, zoning officials, building officials. Anything you can think of, we had focus groups around and we spent one day in my truck and drove 165 miles across Stark County and looked at every place that you could think of across the county.
That's a lot.
It's not a lot, which was a lot in one day with
Yeah.
two consultants asking me questions the whole time as we were driving around. But we went through that process and still connected to those folks. I just had a conversation with them a week or so ago about some questions I had, some things they were doing. So this was really why did we do the study? The rest of the why site selectors are asking those questions, workforce issues, attracting and retaining those people. These same conversations are happening nationally, state, local. I don't need to tell you guys that, you see it the same. But one of the big things, the Senate Select Committee on Housing in 2024 ran around the state asking questions. That was the one point where they were talking about trying to do statewide zoning, which would be a big mistake. If you think locally what that would look like. But they went through all that process. They created their own report. Their report is about 94 pages long. It has about 2 pages worth of real good content because the majority of it is each senator writing their letter about what they heard, which is fine. But then they decided to take that committee and they made it a standing committee. So there is now a standing committee on housing in the state senate. We are lucky in Stark County, the vice chair of that is Jane Pipkin. So we have a good connection to find out what's happening on the state level and push things that we want to see here happen. One of our advisory meetings, she and I were talking about something else, and I said, hey, I have this meeting coming on Monday. They meet the first Monday of every month at 8 o'clock. Can you imagine getting people together at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning? Only time I can get them together and they all show up. It's actually kind of cool. But she said, oh yeah, sure. They're an hour and a half long. She was there the whole hour and a half. I expected the usual in and out, got things to do. Whole hour and a half, stayed for about 20 minutes after and talked to me about things. Now I've heard a rumor that when people ask her about housing in Stark County, she's saying here called Todd. So I'm gonna have to fix that so that she doesn't keep going. But that was a big thing from the state level, and obviously locally, we have these discussions. You guys are having discussions why we're here talking now, what's happening across the county. What's in the study, this is kind of the big part we pulled out, the median income, these are snapshots. So when you see these numbers, they're a little bit different today, but they're close, and they give you the idea because they haven't changed much in ratio to one another. So at the time, a median income in Stark County is about 63,000, median home value about 200. That's unaffordable to somebody who only makes 63,000. They should be buying something about 135. How many of you sold a $135,000 house? That's like a lot right now, right? That's not even talking about anything else in certain places. So it makes it challenging for them. And then the other side of that is that means that on the other side, to get that 200, they're about 25 grand short in income. So we have two options. Lower the house price or raise their income. That's kind of what we're trying to get across as we go through this. What we looked at, Stark Economic Development Board and their metrics that we measure every year. The average wage of jobs that have been created, things like UC, Tractor Supply, Amazon, any of the Provia, all the things that have come to town recently. That average wage is about $27 an hour. When you say $27 an hour, most people say that's a good wage. People are doing good. It's $56,000 a year. Not even at the median income for a household. Then we come back, Career Connect. What Career Connect is it's a program that works through Strengthening Stark. Brings together navigators from places like Urban League, Goodwill, and it works with people who are unemployed or underemployed to get them back to a more living wage. And in that, we see those folks getting about $16.35 an hour on average. So that's 34,000. But when you say 16.35, people still think that's a pretty good wage. People are making good money. So if we put these two people together as a household, they're barely at, not even at the number they need to be to get that median house. So when we start talking about these things, this is what we start to go through. When I was in one of the townships talking to one of the trustees, She works, obviously, we're as trustees, it's our part-time job. In her full-time job, she said, these are my people. They make $16 an hour. They hit home from that side. Then we talk about these are personas that are actually in the study. So we talk about the person all the way to those two, my right, your left, the family of two. Because we start talking about that A word, apartment. Apartment really is pretty short. It's 4 letters when you talk to anybody around here. Right? They don't want it, don't want to hear about it, not gonna do it. Because they say apartments are bad people, crime, all the stuff that they want to say that goes with it. When you get to that though, the family of two, single mom, she's earning $36,000 a year as a dietetic technician. Got her kid there. She should be able to afford rent about $900. Housing payment about 1,000 or so, if you throw in everything else in there, that's around that 30% AMI number. Again, this was done in 2024, so we were talking about 7% interest rates at the time. We're down a little bit from there, not that much, but pretty close as we start to balance that out. And what we start talking about, and what this is really the punch you in the face slide when we start talking to the folks as trustees or council members or mayors or whatever we're talking through, is this is their resident who sits at the T-ball game with you, giving cookies to the kids or bringing, it's not the person dealing drugs, shooting things up, all the bad stuff we want to throw into the apartments. She needs an apartment to rent.
Mhm.
She's just not gonna be in a spot to buy that house.
Yes.
So how do we do that? Because we're not doing it. We're not talking about multi-family villas. We're not talking about smaller single families. We still want the McMansion of 2,500 square feet. And when we were driving around, we stopped at Heritage Park when we were going through Jackson, because there were a bunch of cars around the model, and we thought they were open and people were in there looking. Well, it turned out they weren't open at the time. They were having their quarterly sales meeting, so we were walking through all their Zoom meetings, saying hi. But we're looking at it, it's 1,800 square feet. Not that big of a house, very small lots, because that's an R3 development, but all those houses are selling for about 500 and up.
Yeah.
Which I'm not telling you something you don't know, right? And we're looking at it and they're like, this is the problem, high ceilings, because everybody wants, to bring that ceiling back down, you'll take some costs down, you'll do these kinds of things. People don't want that though, and the builders don't want to build it, because they're still able to get the 500 out of enough people.
Yeah.
So when we look at that, we start talking and we go back through families of 3, families of 4. So then we got to thinking about this a little bit more and said, how do we drill down a little bit more to make this real? We're finishing up a couple, but I'm gonna give you the initial one, wrong here. Mike Nazo, who runs the Port Authority at SCDB, he and I started talking about this, and he's the data guy too, and so he started running through some of these numbers. So when you look at this is a person earning $73,000. The median income for a specific township, not Jackson, but a different one in Stark County. We looked at that, we went through ADP's payroll calculator, calculated what their take-home pay was. So we looked at that and it said their take-home pay goes down after 73 to about $3,700 a month, give or take. Depending on 26 pays, 24 pays, all that kind of balance. Housing cost at $1,250, that was the median housing cost in that specific township, but we put in that they paid that. Car payments, $700, that was actually 2 $350 car payments, anybody got $350 car payments?
Yeah.
That's the old meter with the heater idea, right, at that point. So then we went to the North Canton Y, full childcare costs, so if this is 2 children, one school age, one not, what that would cost them. USDA, that is the USDA number for a family of 4. The joke usually was that before or after egg prices changed. But it was about $1,000. Cell phone, I think we're a little light on it, 125. Gas for the car insurance, we're already upside down $1,000 a month.
Mhm.
The pieces below that, we're not talking about regular medicine, healthcare, we didn't talk about diapers, we didn't talk about clothing for young kids that have to change clothes every 5 seconds when you turn around as they grow. I'm not talking about trying to save some money, what their utilities will be. All we're working on redoing those personas with all this in it. And we're gonna do a rental and home ownership model so that we can really drill into this and talk through it. What I said to Mike when he sent this to me originally was, you just proved why we have so much credit card debt in the United States.
Yeah.
Because that person is going down that list and going, this has to be paid in cash. This has to be paid in cash. I can use this on my credit card. I can put this on my credit card.
Yeah.
And I'm forcing that out. So this is a pretty eye-opening experience for people when you think $73,000 and this is where they end up.
Is this like a family of 4?
Yep.
Okay.
So a family of four, one single earner, we said, but
Oh, okay.
maybe, or maybe it's joint, doesn't matter how we blow that up. You know, because we've had childcare, we take childcare out. I'm still almost negative, when I add the stuff in, I am gonna. So there's other pieces that go into it. Yeah. So how many units are we short? Only about 13,000. Oof, easy number. Again, people ask me, why'd you take this challenge on? It's because it's a small one, I can fix it in 5 minutes. But you look at it and you think back, and I tell people, we created this problem over 40 years. We're not gonna solve it in 6 months.
Yeah.
It's gonna take a lot of work, it's gonna take different pieces and different spots to go. Different ways to work through options, one of the things we talk about too, not just home building, but how do we take the people that are aging in place and try to shift them to other types of houses? We don't have a lot of, ranch style homes being built. We don't have a lot of condos. We just heard that our friends out in another township that pushed down the condo development that could have been for those individuals. You hear a lot of those things, and where do you go with it? But this number is with the study itself. If you actually read the study, then I can give you the copy of it. It's 144 pages long, but a lot of it inside of that is pieces for each municipality and what they look like demographically. The meat of it is about 40 pages of good data to look through. They stopped the study at 75,000 of income. So we extrapolated it out because of the numbers we see in Career Connect and the numbers we see there. What we also believe, so this is the units that we're trying to work on. We're working on those folks that have household income between 35 and 100,000. We think that we obviously are not blind to the fact that there are people above and below that. But if we can work through zoning changes, if we can work through building permit changes, if we can do all those types of things for this group, they go either way.
Yeah.
It's just a zero. Whether you're building $100,000 house or $1 million house, it's zeros. It's the same process for zoning, it's the same process for a building department, it's the same process of finding workforce. It's just a different valuation. So if we can work on this and really drill that through and try to find a way to fix this issue, which we know is really hard because of the cost they need to be at, then we're able to, it'll benefit the other sides of that. So what can we do? Again, this is what we're talking to these elected officials about. What can they do? Raise wages. And they all look at me and go, I can't do that. Yeah, I know. The businesses have to do that.
Yeah.
That's the only way that's gonna happen. So we're also trying to work to educate them. We're gonna spend some time. I'm gonna go do this same presentation to the 17 superintendents at a meeting to talk with the schools about what they need to think about. But we'll talk to businesses. We're gonna do this update with SCDB at its quarterly meeting in October. And we're gonna talk about it. We gotta think about this, guys. We gotta look at what the costs are. Then we come back and say, create more affordable housing options. This is where the municipalities can come into play. Because they can look at their zoning code and realize they don't have the ability to do something. How do we fix that? Look at the city of Canton, talk about infill. So one of the problems I hear in the city of Canton, just in the paper this morning, is their current zoning code is such that if you have a vacant lot in between two houses, you can't put a house on that vacant lot. The zoning code won't allow it.
Why?
Because the lot's too small.
What?
Setbacks, oh, believe me, he knows. I know in this year and this year both.
I'm sorry, that's
a joke.
Yeah, that's
So
just
it's
beyond.
tough. So when you think about it, and here's what's happening, and this is a piece we just talked about too. So I spent some time, Bob now, if you know Bob, from regional planning. Regional planning runs the county land bank. I just had Sarah Peters, who runs the land bank, at 2 different meetings, a working group and the advisory group. What's happening is that lot, because it can't be built on, guess what they can do? They can go to the land bank and they can acquire it for $100 from the side lot. Now, it's not gonna be built on, for sure, or they could sell it later. So one of the things when we talk about municipalities, now the city can't have the initial, one of the things we get to do, we'll go back, when we go back, that's one of the things we're gonna tell them they need to change. They really need to look at that. If you saw the article this morning about the Ritz Hotel apartment complex, then the mayor's comment was, if we tear it down, we'll build housing there, but we'll probably only get 1 or 2 because zoning is such, if you build an apartment building, you have to have 1.5 parking spaces for every unit, and blah, blah, blah now. So it's different, can't do what they used to do. Because back then, people took the trolley or they walked to work because they were built next to the business they were working in.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of those things that are happening on that infill space that are really creating problems to fill those up.
Sorry if you, this is
Stop
already
me
in your presentation, but like, was there conversation around, like investors going in, all with rentals and like the certain cities require so many inspections and limitations on investors, like, I know there's different opinions about it, investors coming in, but if we're talking about providing housing, you know, what did the conversation look like for that?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
And you must have been hanging out with me yesterday morning. So you really start talking about that rental unit piece, that is a big issue that comes up all the time, outside businesses owning these things, jacking rents up, things like that have happened. But we put a lot around looking at that spread and how do we do it between all these different types. When we talked about that, and that comment in this paper this morning, 1.5 parking spaces per unit kind of thing, if you're familiar. Outside of Columbus, they put together, they called it upzoning, I think is what they called it, they termed it. There's a segment outside Columbus that they've zoned in such a way that they do not require any parking spaces for the building. Because it's close to public transit, they know people probably don't, it's kind of like Chicago. People don't own cars in Chicago, it costs too much to park it, and they can get around on the L and they don't have any worry. So they looked at it that way, but guess what? The developer built some parking spaces, because the developer knows some people will have cars. But they just didn't have to do 1.5 for every this and do that and work through it. So there are some things we can show that things are being done in different places and how that might be beneficial here. So how do we do it? This is where I'll get to your answer. These are the 5 priorities that we created. Education, that's actually education and communications now. We've expanded that a little bit. Process and technology, regulatory structure, sites, partnerships, and funding and events. Education and communications. That's this. Getting out, talking to elected officials, getting out, talking to folks like yourselves. This is what's going on. This is what we need support for. This is the things we need to pay attention to and look at. We're gonna be the op-eds will come out of that. We're talking about doing, did I mention the op-ed or does that just when I was talking to you also?
You didn't mention it.
Okay, so one of the things we're gonna look at doing is an op-ed between John McLaughlin, who gets all the RFIs. That's SEDB and myself, talking about if we landed these businesses, this is the number of jobs that we could be bringing to Stark County. In order to bring that number of jobs, we gotta be able to house them. And here's what the things are we gotta look at to do that. Cause some of those jobs are gonna be, you know, they might be $100,000, $150,000 job. Some of them might be the $35,000, $45,000, $50,000 job. They're all gonna be balanced. So how do we work through that? Continuing to do these, we're gonna do some white papers around some different things. We may pull you all into certain things as we start to put these things together to try to educate the community, because we have to get rid of some of that NIMBY attitude. You know, I laughed, Rich and I were talking about this. He had gone to the Ohio Realtors Association meeting not too long, about the same time I went to the Ohio Township Association meeting. And he said that somebody had made up presentations around the YIMBY marketing idea and how people cheered at the Realtors Association. I said, well, they did that in the townships one and everybody laughed. Because we know on the elected side that we don't get any support for doing those kinds of things. But we have to figure out how to make that different. We have to start that education process that it's not bad to have a multifamily, and multifamily could be duplex, triplex, quadplex, could be 10 units, could be 15, could be 100, it doesn't matter, whatever we need to do. So education, communication is important. Process and technology, the big one here is the ability to submit plans, permits, fees electronically and be done. We hear that a lot, that that's a problem. So I can share with you that as of right now, this is a big hot topic in that working group. And there are some demos happening over the next month, the provider to do that at the county level. So we are actively in that process. And that will hopefully push some things to be a little bit better. Because you can email it to the building department, but then you still gotta run to the health department, then you still gotta run to the sanitary sewer, then you still gotta run over here to the township and so what if you could just submit all your stuff in one place, pay all your permits and fees and all the links together and you're done?
They want it notarized too. They want stuff notarized. It's
Yep.
crazy.
And you talk about the cost of putting 15 sets of plans together, of getting notarizations done all the time, all this other stuff. that goes
And
into
in
it.
their day-time.
Yep.
9 to 5.
Yeah. So, again, that's a big thing we're trying to get accomplished, is to get to that point where you can do some of those things. Regulatory structure, we'll talk about too, I should say up there, we're talking about process and the process, just making it easier. You know, I know like somebody I talked to said they do some work in West Virginia, and in West Virginia where they're at doing the work, there's a concierge they go to. So they don't run around they still don't have the electronic submittal, but they give all their stuff to one person, and that person runs it everywhere for them and then bring their stuff back. still better. You know, it's a step different. But it also. Are you all familiar with I'll call it the portal. I call it Portal 0.5 that the regional planning put together. So on regional planning's website, you gotta hunt for it in a second. There is a portal that they've created where you can see submissions that have happened at RPC and where they are in the process. So if it's conditionally approved and then below it, it will say what whose conditions they are. So it might say Stark sanitary sewer, or it might say township zoning, whatever the condition is that they're waiting on. So you can actually see that if you're looking to develop a property, you click on it, it's GIS centered. You can click on the map and it will say not needed for the county. This is a Kansas City, go to Kansas City's building and zoning department. So they're taking a step, but this new one with the county on the other side will be broader to look at permits and all that stuff together. So again, we're trying to push those buttons to get them to do different things. Regulatory structure, that group will work on the biggest problem that we all hear. Zoning, building codes, all those things, and how do we fix those issues? This is gonna come back to a little bit of your question about inspections for landlords and things like that. So when I said yesterday morning, there are 5, there's a 6th one now, kind of. Nonprofit construction and development. Any of you deal with any of those folks? If you do, they're some of the most competitive people in the world.
Be like what?
Habitat for Humanity, Canton for All People, ICANN Housing. If you go even to the repair, construction, hammer and nails, Project Rebuild, all those kinds of things. I had 20 of them in a room yesterday morning all together.
Oh, boy. No one was
I'm
shot.
still standing. I didn't have to go to the hospital. My daughter's in PA school. She just started a rotation at the ER at Altman. I didn't have to go see her. So we made it through. It was actually a very productive discussion. But that topic really came up. And if you know Julie Sparks at ICANN, she'll certainly tell you what she feels anytime she wants to type. She said, we're at the wrong time to be putting the screws down on some of these local landlords because it's creating your problem. They're getting out and they're letting the outside people come in and take it over. So, there's a balance. We have to be sure that people are safe living in these places.
Yeah.
But we can't overburden
Yeah.
the landlord with some of that stuff. That's again, part of what we're doing. I have no authority in these places. I just keep trying to educate and pound through that these are the things that make sense. And we talk about that a little bit, one person said to me, they own a rental in the city of Canton. They had some inspection happen and whoever inspected it, however it came back, what they would want them to do would cost $35,000 to get it all done. So the building's not worth the cost to tear it down.
Yeah.
So we just lost a housing.
Yeah.
Because guess what? Lot's too small to build a new house on.
Yeah.
So now I've got an open space. So we gotta keep working on that. That regulatory structure will be an important part of that. Sites, partnerships and funding. Really working with nonprofits again, what those partnerships look like. We said need to start looking at some partnerships that are instead of just public-private, they're public-private-private. Public government, private for-profit developer, private nonprofit developer. It's the only way we're gonna drive the cost down. Is looking with that nonprofit. Funding, talking to banks, or things we could do to create special loan packages, or the things we could do to create some incentive options with the bank, or the things we could do from a development perspective that allow better carrying costs for these developers to build out a full allotment or something like that. What can we do in those spaces to work through that? Sites is a big one. What sites do we have? How can we build? What can we build? I'll share with you too. It just kicked off about 3 weeks ago. Second meeting might be this Friday. With Fund for Economic Future and Team Neo and SEDB. Working on a sites inventory and strategy plan. Because we have about 2 or 3 really, really good still industrial sites here locally in Stark County, across the county. Once we fill those, then what? So this plan will start to look at what other places could be industrial, whatnot. We are also taking that a step further, and that's why I'm sitting through these. We're attaching housing sites to that whole process to look at some of the old ways of we build our industrial facility and we build our houses around it so people can come to work. If we can go back to that, because transportation is an issue. And we start talking about the cost, if we could take some of that cost out because they don't have to drive as far to get to work, or we could figure out shuttles or something, however that looks, walking. And my daughter lives, as I said, she's in Pittsburgh and finishing school, and 2 of her PA rotations are across the street at the hospital. She literally will get up and walk across the street and go.
Yeah.
So that is the kind of stuff that we're gonna talk about in that sites survey work. That work is being funded by SCDB, county commissioners, Stark Community Foundation, and the Demkin Foundation. So that's how we were able to pay for that. Joan Close, who's at Buffer Economic Future, did the 2 studies at Summit in Cuyahoga when she was working with her consulting firm. Now she's at the Fund for Economic Future and she's leading it. So we'll be working with her on that process to get that done. So again, looking through those pieces. Events, big study recommendation that came out was to have a housing summit in Starktown. Our goal is to look at that towards the end of next year, kind of fourth quarter of 2026. But when you say summit to me, that means a day, day and a half, outside speakers, people coming from all over the place to talk. You know, and again, some of that education on outside investors and coming in, or outside developers that come in. I was a little leery of that one when I talked to Joe. From the development standpoint of some local developers getting, I don't want people, don't be bringing people out here. Well, a lot of them said to me, I can't build at the scale you're asking for. If we can partner with some of them, we could make things happen, we're okay with that. Okay, that was a surprise to me, I was a little leery of that one. The other thing that group will do, this is the other bloodshed one that's gonna probably happen. I will be bringing a referee along for that meeting. We're gonna quarterly do a developer building official roundtable. We're gonna start building that out, so building officials, zoning officials, and developers will be in the same room.
Be interesting.
Anybody want to be a fly on the wall and out?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, one of the things you'll find out if you get to know me is, I got the nickname in a lot of situations, especially around the Hall of Fame, when there was stuff going on back and forth between the halls committees and chambers committees going. One room. Ball in one room, get it over with, pull the Band-Aid off, scream, yell, do whatever you gotta do, get it out. Confrontation's not a 4-letter word, we can have it, we can move on. I love being challenged, you're getting pushed back at me if you see things in here that you don't think make sense. I always ask people for that. That happened a little bit yesterday morning, and it was good discussion, but you know, one of them came to me afterwards and said, hey, I'm sorry if I came off a little aggressive. Didn't bother me at all, never hurt my feelings. You know, we need to get somewhere. Push me, tell me something different, let's go and do that. So we're gonna start bringing those guys together, and it's gonna have to start out with the usual. I did this one time with our Community Improvement Corporation in Jackson. We actually had, right when Angela Kavanaugh started as a building official, she and Joni Poindexter, our zoning official, were there. I invited developers, more commercial developers and stuff to come in and talk. 10 minutes, really good conversation. Then it turned to, in 1995, you guys did this to me and I couldn't get this through, and no. That's gonna be the referee side. I'm gonna bring someone in that's not me, who they don't know, who can sit there and really moderate that and say, that's not what we need to go, guys, we need to get back on track. So we will get it there.
I think you need a priest.
No. I might take you up on that one, I might find somebody. And you know, but that's the thing, people don't do it because they're afraid of it. I'm, let's go, you know, we need to figure this out, we have to get something done. I think that's kind of why I got put in this position, that stuff doesn't bother me. But then when you get that down, and then when we go to that nonprofit piece, some of those folks are now gonna come up into some of these other committees, because we need to connect them in there. But we'll keep them working through a little bit on their side. This is the advisory team, you'll recognize at least one name of.
Is
So Martin Wolchek and Matt Griffin, those top 3 folks on this list. Community Foundation, Education Service Center, so we keep our connection to the educators. Joe is connected to every one of the districts here, so it's easy to pull at one time. Matt is in there because he is a young professional. We want to make sure we keep the young folks engaged, and what are they looking at and how are they going through this. Those 3 are the co-captains for the Education and Communications Working Group. There are some other people that have been brought into that specific working team outside of this list, and we probably add a few more as we go. Trying to keep those around 10 people or so. Don't want to get to the point where it takes us 4 years to get through a conversation. But they'll lead those. Events. Rich and Marisa, so you guys bug Rich, he's gonna be part of that quarterly setup, so we'll see how that, if he comes in here with bandages and stuff on, you know, we had to rough him. But so they're working on those events. Marisa puts this as a charity, she was our Switzerland connection, if you will, to the nonprofits. The Sisters doesn't actually build, they do a lot of funding in those spaces though, so it wasn't like, well, you talked to Habitat, but you didn't talk to this person or that person, and after yesterday, they all kind of came together, I think they now get. Where they all have different things to do, so we're gonna work them in different groups and set them up. Alan Harold, when he started on this group, was the auditor, so you'll notice Richard Regular down below. I wasn't trying to put two commissioners on there, but Alan switched hats on me in the middle of it. So Alan, Bob Gessner from MCTV and Dean Wyndham, who was the person who got smacked at Lake here not too long ago, is in the process and technology piece. So we have a developer about how you submit through those processes. Bob, who is connected to the technology world through MCTV, and he's really passionate about that, as well as he's a board member at Habitat and things he does there. And then Alan, that's what he was doing in the auditor's office, was working on the technology. So that's why he came in that side. Then Bob now, Joe Race, Richard Regula for regulatory structure. Again, Joe is connected to all of the builders that we look at that piece and talk about what they see problems across the board. Bob, obviously, with regional planning is a big part of this. Bob has been at all the meetings, he's been very open, he's been open to listening to making, we're hoping we can get some changes and things going, especially land bank wise too, with him on top of those things. Then sites, partnerships and funding, Todd Pugh, Ralph Lover and Mark Scheffler. So again, people that are connected to sites, people that are connected to funding, and people that are in there from the foundation side that work with partners along the way as well. Marcy just joined with when we started the nonprofits, so her and Marisa kind of tag team in that as well. They were both there yesterday morning when we went through that process. So it was very good to start that. So this is the group that helps me. So then we talked to the group about, hey, if you're an elected official, what if we do nothing? And we can't just sit here on our hands. We have to do something. Because we won't have new businesses attract. We have strain on our talent. We have reduced qualities of life eventually. The economy won't grow, and then loss of local talent twice. I want my unfair share of talent. Loss of local talent is my K through 12 folks. I want to get them back here as much as I can. Strain on business and local in the local talent above is my unfair share of all the people that come in from outside of Stark County that are at Walsh, Malone, wherever they are. I want them here too. So I'm being greedy. So that's why we talked about it. We got to make sure that they stay here, because we want all the talent we can get here. That's the only way we're gonna turn those, again, older, smaller, poorer, younger, more prosperous, all that fun stuff. You don't have to read this. Biggest thing in this piece is this was kind of like our mission statements as we were going through an advisory group building this out. The fact that just really housing is out of reach, or their cost burden 73% of the folks in Stark County. Not a good place to be. Then we talk about the rent increases over the last 5 years, about 45%. And some of the things we need to do, because we have to create that 12,877 units. When we say units to us is a door. So if I build a 100-unit apartment complex, I have 100 units. If I build a single family home, I have 1 unit. So that's how we look at it. Then our primary goal, and this is kind of our North Star of everything we look at, eliminate the housing imbalance in the targeted segment for Stark County's workforce within the range of 35,000 to 100,000 by 2030. My friend Julie Sparks said, you might not have credibility with that because you're not going to build that many. I said, I know that. But I'm not going to do a goal that says I kind of want to put a dent in it. We may have to extend 2030 a little bit, but we're going to certainly try. And that number, 12,877, kind of a specific number, is a moving target. Things are going to change, right? We're going to have different environments. We're going to have different interest rates. We're going to have different housing needs. We're going to have different workforce. All that's going to change. Every minute it changes. So we know that we're going to have some changes as we go. This is what we tell them we're willing to do on our end. We're going to be that foundational support. And yes, the pun was intended when we put that in there to them, is we're going to facilitate the working team, all the meetings that happen, monitor the progress of the housing studies recommendations. So we're going to start creating metrics and milestones around that. Catalog active housing sites and the ones that are desirable to build houses on. Inventory against that site work, inventory desirable development sites, the ones that haven't even been thought about yet. Create a resource for common zoning resolution information. That's a big one. Starting to try to get us combined. They had an intern over the summer. God bless the poor kid. I asked him to kind of go through a zoning resolution and give me what they look like across the county. His eyes would get crossed every time he started talking to me. Because, you know, it's different in Perry than it is in Plain. It's different than Plain than it is in Jackson. It's different in the city of Canton. In all the zoning resolution books, nothing looks alike. Some have charts. I've tried to push Joni to push our stuff more to charts because no one wants to read 16 pages of paragraphs. Just tell me what's the bottom line. So we're working through that to try to get some common ground in there. Resources for them for their strategic plans or comprehensive plans. Again, we're working with that state and federal legislation a lot. One thing that I can tell you in that, it came up that pre-approved expediting plans is something building department officials really can't do because they can't jump people in line. It's actually written into their bylaws and in the code of regulations. So if you have a plan that you're gonna build 16 times. And it's the same exact thing, and you go and you submit it, and it should be here you go. Then there's 5 people in front of you with custom bills that they gotta go through, you have to wait till the 5 custom bills are done. That's ludicrous to me. So we were talking through it and they said, well, guess what? People in Columbus are working on some changes to the language. That group just met last Thursday. We spent an hour and a half changing a sentence to get them to put it in there so that we could do this. So if we can get that done, we've accomplished something. That's what we want to do. So we're continuing to push that piece as we go from that side to that. This is what we asked them to do. So this is gonna come back to a little bit of your question too. We asked them to create their own housing committee or team, however they choose in their municipality. Mayor, council, building, zoning officials, residents if you want. Whoever you want, just create one for me to work with. We had those meetings with the 10. I'm in the process of scheduling the second meeting with each of those 10 to meet with their groups and talk to them. We're gonna talk to them about an alliance and places like that. This is what's happening. This is what we're hearing about what you're trying to do with inspection. Maybe think about things a little differently. Maybe go talk to some people that are actually doing the work. You know, we tend to, in the government space, do what we think we can do without talking to people who actually do. Joe Race will tell you, one of the things, we changed some things in our R3 zoning resolution in Jackson. Because Joni came to me and we were looking through it and I said, if you would have came to us and asked to build attached units in an R3 on a 20, I think it was 23 acres she used, you could have built 138 attached units on that 23 acres. If you would have came to me for that same spot and asked for 6 single detached units, you could have built 36. Well, how did that ever happen? How it was drafted years ago, no one ever looked at it, no one ever questioned it. So we gotta get that back in the balance. So we changed it so that it is more close, being equal on that side, because we would rather see the detached, that people are more open to seeing that happen. But the problem is, people gotta think that through, they gotta look at that piece, they gotta ask those questions. So we wanted to do those types of things to build their committee and talk through it. Comprehensive plans, we want them to take a look at those if they have them. If they don't, think about doing something with it. Perry just finished theirs with RPC, so it has some things on housing in it. If you're not familiar with it, it should be out on their site by now. Pull it up and see if anything will affect what you guys do. But when we did that, I should go back to that, talking about the zoning piece of the R3. So I didn't know if just changing the number of units per acre would do the trick, or if we had to look at setbacks or something like that. So I had her call Joe. And Joe Race and a couple of developers came in and talked through that. Because I can't know how to use it. Tell me how it works. Then if it makes sense, if it looks too big to me, then we'll have to pull back. But if it makes sense, and what they said made sense. So that's the way it is today. It's already been changed and it's out there. But when you come back to those again, we want them to look at their resolution. North Canton's in the process of looking at theirs. But if you look at North Canton right now, basically you can't even do multifamily there. So they're looking at some of their stuff. Martin Van Gundy, their building official and zoning official, is on the regulatory structure committee. So we spent some time with him. We want them to inventory their desirable housing development sites. Where they want to see, what do you want to do in your municipality? Inventory vacant commercials, so we can look at that. That's become a big no-no. Not because it's not worth it, but because it's too expensive. I hear plumbing's too costly. We looked at it with the Synchrony building. We talked to some folks about doing it there, way too expensive, which is all fine now because it's in the process of being hopefully used in other ways. We'll see. Then all of the cubicles that were in there are now out of it. When you walk into that building now, it is amazing how big it is. When there's cubicles in it, it looks big, but when there's nothing in it and you can see wall to wall, it's enormous. So he's looking at that. Chris Amerigen bought that building, if you know Chris, he's. One of Stu Lichter's partners, so don't hold that against him. He's done a nice job looking at some opportunities there. Inventory vacant. In our inventory, the commercial sites for new development, that's what we're gonna do with the site survey anyway, so we'll get to that for them and we'll do that kind of work for them. We leave them with the goal again, big and bold, ask them to buy in. We ask if they will do, when we leave the room, we ask, will you put your committee together? Will you give us access and will you listen? So far, all 10 have said yes. They're all working on that as we speak. Got a little behind with the city of Canton with the changeover from Chris Hardesty to Peter. The Hersky, Peter's great, it'll be fine. We just gotta give him a minute to get settled in. Little change in North Canton with the mayor leaving, so that's got a little bit, I gotta get Matt brought up to speed and then we'll get back to doing their stuff. Martin's involved, so we're good. But we'll get through some of those. So that's how we end that. Then the other thing we do talking about when we talk about infill. You guys have all talked to Rich, so I'm sure you're all familiar with
Not everybody is, so
GOPC.
yeah.
So if you're not, Rich brought this back. And this is again why we do these things with all of us that actually know what we're talking about. If I can get it through here. There we go. So. The work that the Greater Ohio Policy Center did, well, look, I had it up from yesterday morning still. They created with the Ohio Realtors Association and the Greater Ohio Policy Center, this guidebook for zoning, construction. One of the things that I like about what they put together is when I get down to here. I don't know why it's not letting me scroll, but like, this is something when you talk about the city of Canton, buildable area on a lot. Think through that. We're gonna push on the mayor and the building department to talk about that space. But when you get down in this space. That blue box is what I like. Things that have happened in the state of Ohio. It's not, oh, you're telling me about Indiana, or you're telling me about, New York. Nope, this happened in Dayton, this happened in Euclid, these are things that they've done. This piece you guys can all pull up, housingoh.org is the website they put together. You have to give it, you have to tell them, when you go to the tab on this piece, you have to tell them your email address and then they'll let you download stuff. It's no big deal. But that's what's in there. So this is in there, and then one of the other things that they did that's been really, this is what pushed that issue of expedited permits to come. Was they created sets of plans with an architect that are pre-approved through the state of Ohio. To build in mostly for an infill housing space. So when you look at them. This one. This is a multi-family unit. Looks like a single family house. But there's a front door under the porch and there's a front door on the side. Two different units in there, when you look at the top. First unit, 3 beds, 2.5 bath, 1,400 square feet. Second unit, 1 bed, 1 bath, 580 square feet. Can be combined with unit 1. So it could be a single family home. Or the main idea behind this is, when you get down into the plan, and again, I said it's the whole plan is here. When you get down to here. Right here. Is the door between the units. This is truly set up for a multi-generational family. Well. Grandma and grandpa can live in the back, 1 bedroom, 1 bath. Son, daughter-in-law, whichever way you wanna go on that, and kids can live in the front. Solves a couple problems. Cost is easier because you got 2 sets of income or dollars coming in. And could potentially solve the childcare problem. If grandma and grandpa are willing to watch the kids. Cause they can just run between the doors. So it's a pretty cool concept. And when you look at it, it's built for long, narrow lots, like city infill lots should be. But we just gotta get it where we can actually build it.
Yeah.
It'll fit, I think if I remember right, Rich told us. The lot could be as little as 35 feet wide. For some of these houses, it's pretty narrow.
Yeah.
So, you look at some of that stuff. When I talked to the folks in Alliance, when I said they're doing a lot of things. We've been having some meetings even before we started these. Mastriani and looked at, we're trying to put some new allotment in out there. And they were talking the minimum lot width they could go under that code at the time was 60 feet. And the issue that we were talking about was infrastructure. Because the infrastructure cost they had calculated at $1,300 a linear foot. So 1,300 times 60, then you buy your lot, then you build your house. It was about 600 grand before I even come close to finishing this. So it was really an eye opener when we did it. What they did, this is option one, this is option two. This is standard kind of duplex, again, the same thing. Part of what Todd Pugh brings into this view too is coming from Enviroscapes. He said, you know, I can put these landscape plans together for you. I know what they look like. You're not gonna get it until I show you a picture. This is the picture. So if we could grab this and we could shove it in a street view of the city of Canton and show them what that house would look like, you can start to show people how these things could change. So this one is just truly two duplex units, 3 beds, 2.5 baths, 1,400 square feet, 2 bed, 2.5 baths, about 1,100. What you'll see is if you get to, when we get down to that page where we were before. Oops. Just no door. They're just two separate units. But again, looks similar to a single family from the front when you're looking at it. And then there are 8 sets of these. This is just kind of the 3 main categories. Just truly a single family. None of them built with garages, so that always is a question. But depends on your lot, you could do around behind, you could add that part of it on. But this is what prompted the expedited zoning. If I already have these done. And these are pre-approved at the state level, they have everything they need. If I walk in and you have, what do I gotta go through this whole? You know, and I get from the county side, oh, we still do it within a day, we get it back quick. I'm like, yeah, but it should be like a 5-minute thing.
Yeah.
I should be able to get it done, and turn around right away. So again, we're trying to press. Some of those things that we built. This is really good that they did it, and actually, you guys know Veronica Cordello from Ohio Realtor Association, she's gonna be here on the 2nd to talk about this to the group. We have that board meeting. And we have one of the economists coming from the National Association of Home Builders to talk a little bit about economics. Housing.
Can we find this online somewhere?
This?
Yeah.
Housingoh.org.
Housing OH.
Yep, if you go to that site, these plans are there, all 8 versions of it, again, put your email address in again. That guidebook is there. There's a resources tab that gives you South Bend, Indiana, Municipal League of Michigan, a city in Vermont, and the country of Canada have adopted these options. That's where the GOPC and Ohio Realtors got this from, was mostly South Bend, Michigan, and Vermont, because Canada have it after these. Canada has it by province. So there's 47 options on their site. And it's by, you know, whether it's Ottawa or whatever from that perspective. But it gives you some data around that. There's some other things on there about special financing that they're trying to work through with some banks. So I think there's a lot of work again. It's happening at the state level. It's happening at national levels. We got to drag it down. What we want to get to is, and not because I want anybody pointing at me, is we want Stark County to be the forefront of doing these things. We want to be the ones that are driving what's going on here. And I get a lot of calls. I just spent some time with Medina. They called and wanted to know what we were doing and how we were doing it. Talked to Summit. Wayne County did the study at the same time we did ours with the same consultants. Their study, theirs is actually on their Economic Development Board site. Similar recommendations. Their study just looks different. But believe it or not, the people that were in the consulting firm, the 2 that did ours, left and started their own firm. And the other stayed with the other one. So Wayne stayed with the other one and they finished it over there. And we went with the guys when they split off and they finished it, but they look different.
So you're saying there's a similar study plan for Wayne?
Mhm.
Park?
Mhm.
That would be interesting.
If you go to the Wayne's Economic Development Board, I forget what it's called, Meredith's group. It's on their site.
Cool.
We're in the process, SEDB site's in the process of being updated so we can throw all the stuff together, and we're gonna create a whole housing piece and show all the things that we're doing. Post the white papers, all that kind of stuff. Theirs is out there, you can pull it. There's been studies done, GOPC does a lot of these, they did one in Akron, they did one in Springfield, Ohio, down in Dayton where I grew up, they did, there's been one done. Cuyahoga was working on it, we were at the Federal Reserve's meeting, the summit in Cleveland here not too long ago, and the lady from Cuyahoga was sitting next to me, she goes, where'd you get your study done? These people are taking forever, how do you get the study done? I'm like, here, just give me a call, but, so we want to lead those things forward as we go. We need to keep pushing and we need more feedback. So if you see things that are happening that are, especially if they're repetitive, you try to do something and it's a problem.
On that note.
Yeah. I'll open the floor. Yeah. Okay, yeah, okay, let's talk, we're
I was
done, so you can do
actually-
whatever.
on a zoning board
Okay.
for a township. I'm not gonna throw names, and it was not Jackson, just so you know.
I would know because I was interviewed.
I was on the zoning board for 1 year, and I thought I was going to rip my face off.
Okay.
In my opinion, you need younger people that understand how we need to evolve and things must change to stay afloat.
Yep.
Yeah.
On this committee, they literally argued for an hour over where a comma should go.
Okay.
And it was a bunch of old men, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but they all sat here like this and had to be the biggest male in the room to win where the comma went instead of solving the problems. And I'm thinking to myself the whole time, how do we get you out of office? Because you're killing all of it.
Yeah.
We're trying to grow and develop and all of these things, and you just don't want to change.
Yeah.
My feedback, I'm done.
Most detrimental sentence, no, you're good. Most detrimental sentence in the English language is, that's the way we've always done it.
Oh,
Have to get rid of that sentence. You get rid of that sentence, you do good. And I mean, that's what been one of the things for me. Being in an elected position is stop telling me that's how we did it.
Yeah.
And stop telling me no.
Mhm.
Find a way for me to say yes. And that's what we have to do across the county, through zoning commissions, same thing. We get it all the time. We feel like we gotta educate them. No, they want you to pay attention to this. We want you to look at these types of things.
Yeah.
We had one that they denied, switching from a business district to a residential. On Erie Avenue in the middle of nowhere, basically. And there's a business on each side, but the one that's on the one side is person's business who wants to build a house. And the property's been in their families for years. And there's residential right behind. So to me, I'm looking at it going, "Oh, brainer, why would I not do that?"
Yeah.
They recommended denial from our zoning commission. They cited some things that made some sense about later on down the road and building, business next to it, blah, blah, blah. But for me, when you look at the process, it was bigger and it made sense to me to do it. So, and it's a weird, because there's non-conforming issues in there that you have to deal with and spot zoning question and all that, but. We deal with it and it's amazing. Amazing to me, the power of the NIMBY space.
Yeah.
You gotta be ready to take that confrontation on, and you gotta be ready to say, no, this is what's right. And you gotta just able to say, that happened to us in Jackson, if you all know, Don DeVille's allotment at Hawks Nest, I mean, literally first time. So when they get after the referendum and they did away with the R4 that we approved finally. When he came back with the R3 question to build the condos. We have a panic button behind our counter as we're sitting up there and it isn't trusting now, police chief's in the room, so it's okay. First time I ever thought I was gonna reach over and hit the button. There was a guy in the front row, and he was literally shaking to get up and yell at us. That he couldn't believe we were listening to this again, this should never be able to be rezoned, we already voted on it, it's a different zoning class. Guy owns a property, he can do whatever he wants, he can come here 80 freaking times. Whether we deny it or not, we gotta listen to him, that's part of the process. Well, I literally was like coming at. Cause where he's at the microphone, I'm like right there, and he was like, I think I had to. Laugh a little off. But yeah, zoning commissions are tough, and I think that's the spot where we really have to do some work. Because we have those issues where. You have to be forward thinking. Part of the reason we wanna give them. Some things to resources to use is to have some of that backstop. To say, these are the things that we're seeing, this is the data behind it, guys. We're not saying, hey, Todd wants an apartment building. We're not saying, hey, Linda and Rich got together and they're gonna put this apartment building together and it makes sense for them, so let's just do something for them. No, the data says we have to be able to house these people. We don't have the ability to do it at a ownership proposition. Because I even saw, there was one came out and I shared this with a couple of folks. That said that, you could buy a house in Ohio at an income range, median house. For you had to have an income of 60-some thousand. So people go, oh, see, you can do this. I said, can you read the fine print for me? Fine print said they had 10% down. Read the second fine print that says if they put 20% down, that's really where the number was coming from. You show me a person who's earning $35,000 to $60,000 who has saved up 40, 50, 60, $100,000 to put that down payment down. You can't do it. And that's where because these numbers are assuming when we talk about the personas that they have 0. This is what it would cost if they're doing either zero down, some kind of, second with their first and doing all that kind of layers, something's going in there. So that's where the difference comes into play of what people can truly afford.
Yeah. More
From that
realistic.
perspective.
In a quick little nutshell.
Mhm.
We talked about infill housing, we talked about Hawks Nest. I saw what happened at Bourdine.
Yep.
Up in Lake. As realtors, what are we doing? Like, it feels like. The public isn't on board, you trot anything out and they're like. Again, we talked about this, the political climate is, it's not helping me, it's helping you, so I don't want it. What are we doing? Who are we talking to? Are we leaning on zoning or are we just waiting for you to do it all?
I would talk to zoning officials. I would talk to people as you're selling homes. Maybe you have somebody who's looking for a house. Start feeling out more what they really want. Because if we can come back and we can start compiling more and more data that says, hey, you guys have all talked to 150 different people. And all of them are asking for the same thing. That's been the question. I have this discussion with other elected officials from time to time.
Small branch.
Yeah, nobody wants that. Yes, they do.
Everybody wants that,
Okay.
we're all given. And that's what we want, small
Yeah.
branch.
And it's condo associations, it's what Dean was trying to do, what his, and one of the things that gets missed in some of this too is it's misinformation. But they had put together a way to bring utilities to that if they could get it done. They had the sanitary engineer on board, they had things in place, they're probably still gonna be able to do it now. We had Mike get involved from the port, so we could try to figure out how we tip this to do that. I mean, even to the point, it's just talking to developers, you don't forget to ask these questions. Because if we can bring the cost down in any way, we wanna be able to do that.
And we do have builders on board.
Yeah.
Or definitely
Yep.
have shown interest, I wanna do this.
So I will tell you guys, if you're not aware, Port Authority usually gets used for commercial property. The Port Authority has the ability, if the project's big enough, to basically come in and own the project. I'll use air quotes, because you basically have to have them title it. When the Port Authority is involved in a project, there is no sales tax on the materials. If you're not familiar with that idea. So when you talk about some of these large commercial developments, you're saving millions of dollars. If you had a big residential development, that's big enough. And Mike Nazo at the port can run the numbers and tell you if it's worth it. Because there are, it's a minuscule, couple $1,000 or something, that fee that goes to the port. Ports could gouge things, but Stark County has never done that. We've kept it kind of blank, kind of break even kind of space. So there's ways that can happen. I had that discussion with Dehoff when they rezoned the Redicon space to put that, put his senior living facility in. So you're talking big number, tens of millions of dollars. We could save you sales. Oh, forgot about that. Okay, let's have a conversation with Mike, see what we can do. They can TIF projects, so you can get the tax increment financing to bring those revenues back to build the infrastructure, because that's always a problem. Again, if we're talking $1,300 a linear foot. Good night, how do you get there? So there's things like that. So I would say a lot of it is all those things. Talk to the electeds in those spaces, have them talk, have them come back around. I'm gonna give this same presentation to the Stark County Townships Association in October, I think. Again, so I'm trying to get as many of them in the same room, because I can't bring, because of the sunshine law, I can't put all three trustees in a room and give them this spiel. I can only have one. So I always get one, when I went to Plain, it was John Sabo and Lisa Gamble, and we sat and talked through it. It was right when they lost their zoning inspector, so we didn't have one. When we went to Perry, it was Lisa Nelligan and their zoning inspector, and we always gotta find just one. From their fiscal officer could sit if they wanted from each one, but it's up to them for how they do that. I went to them, Michelle and George Kiko and I sat together and went through it, just me and him. But that was important because Louisville's doing so much and they're so connected there. We want to make sure those two talk to each other. One of the big places we've talked, and we'll see if it comes out in the sites, is the 62 corridor. There's a lot of space out there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of places that could become industrial, could become housing, could be do different things. You look at Louisville, the number of redwoods, that was one. When we're driving around on that Tuesday in February, Chuck, the consultant to me goes, "You guys don't have any townhomes. You people need some townhomes around here, especially to rent." Okay, so we're just cruising around, drive out to Louisville, cross Broadway into the Ryan Homes development, take a turn and go, there's a whole street of towns, where'd these come from? You know, and it was one of those kind of ahas of, oh, here's some, but they're for purchase. But I hear that's happened a couple other places through the county, as soon as they get it, they're sold. Okay, because people want that. People want the garden or patio home. You know, the, what is it? I never remember the name of it, I'll get it wrong. They have a setup in green.
Orchard Park, Cahoe Canadian.
No, it's, Epcot. The Epcot houses that are all patio, and Mark's, I've done them, Glenn worked some of those, yeah. Yeah, so there's a couple of things like that where it's supposed to be, you know, more or less, we'll call it 0 lot lines. Very close together, no real backyards, but people don't wanna deal with that stuff. And there are young professionals that don't wanna deal with that stuff. And how do we bring them in? And we're not gonna grow if we don't do all these other things. So it's a million different pieces and parts. That's one of the things yesterday morning out of that meeting with nonprofits. I asked each of them that has a plan for things they're trying to do to send it to me. So I can try to create this coordinated look at what the nonprofits are doing across the town. That'd be pretty useful to most people to know what they're doing and what spaces they're trying to get into. And then we'll go piece by piece. So, and again, anything you guys see, I don't claim to know it all. I don't know it all. I've sat through more webinars and more things than I ever thought I would in my life. Just try to get myself up to speed on some of these things. And there's different ones. You look at, there's one in Cleveland. It's the Hope Scholars Complex. It's apartments that were generated near, I think it's, I can't remember if it's Cleveland State or if it's Tri-C. In order to live there, you have to be a single parent that's going back to school. You either get educated to go upskill or just to get back into the workforce. So they get incentives for being there, but if it's just, if me and my wife wanna go live there, I can. But if I were a single dad with 2 kids and I'm trying to go back to school to get it, I can go live there now. So it's different things like that too, that help incentivize the rest of those types of issues that we go. And we're trying to learn those. South Bend, Indiana is a big one. We talked about that these guys used it. They got a lot of things going on there. Summit wise, Danville, Virginia has done a couple of years of summits. And that was one that came out in the study, and the consultant has connected me to those folks. So we're gonna go over and talk to them a little bit. Get them in Zoom, and if we need to go over and visit, we will. But a lot of those things are going on, so. Anything else? I know it took more time than you.
No,
I'm between you and
great.
lunch. That's like, that's fine.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, guys, as realtors, some of this may have been like, I don't know how this fits for me, but our job is to better understand what's happening in our community, the challenges in our community, so that we can speak in an educated way with our clients. We don't need to regurgitate
Oh, yeah.
all of this necessarily so much as say, here's some exciting things that are happening. So thanks for your work, Todd. Thanks for coming and sharing it with us today. Let's give him a hand. And go and enjoy some lunch, thanks to Cross Country. Appreciate y'all being here.
You're welcome to stay for lunch.
Yeah.